Chapter 706. When Emo Jingshan entered the bathroom, he caught a glimpse of several toiletries placed in front of the bathroom mirror. Last night, he took a shower in the spare bathroom of the study and didn't come back here. He didn't enter the bedroom until Jinwan fell asleep for a long time. He didn't notice that all the toiletries here had been replaced with couples style. Auntie Chen had asked for Jinwan's opinion on all her daily necessities. It was probably Jinwan's idea to replace all the toiletries with couples style. When this little woman wasn't being stubborn with him, she was very romantic in her bones. She even knew how to play around with these little things. When she was sober, she lacked this tenacity, but in the past 3 years, she had become more and more stubborn. Even when she was on the verge of death, she would give him a fatal blow and wouldn't stop until he was in pain. Emo Jingshan picked up one of the blue toothbrushes and glanced at the pink one next to it. It seemed that he hadn't taken a vacation for too long. It was a rare vacation in life, and it was rare for him to find a sense of security in this kind of ordinary warmth that he had never felt before. Emo Jingshan spent half a month building up Jinwan's courage. He accompanied her to shopping malls, parks, and amusement parks to familiarize her with all kinds of people. And when Auntie Chen went out to buy groceries, he didn't let Auntie Chen go, but took Jinwan to the supermarket. In the past half a month, Jinwan hid behind him in fright when she saw strangers outside, and even crouched on the ground with her head in her hands when she saw something familiar outside. She gradually adapted to strangers outside, but she was still used to holding his hand every time. Even in the supermarket, when he pushed the shopping cart with one hand and took something on the shelf with the other, she carefully tugged at his clothes or cuffs. During the weekend, Xia Tian came to the Yu Garden to see Jinwan, but Jinwan ignored her. Obviously, Jinwan was not afraid of her, but she didn't recognize her. When Xia Tian asked Jinwan if she didn't find her familiar, Jinwan's answer was, "Yes, you look very familiar. You look like a bad woman who steals other people's husbands in TV shows. Tell me the truth, are you going to steal my husband?" Xia Tian was so angry that she almost exploded. Auntie Chen explained with a headache, "Miss Xia, please don't mind her. Recently, the way our wife gets familiar with the outside world is to watch movies, TV shows, or some videos. You are too beautiful, so she may have misunderstood. How dare she not recognize me?" Xia Tian angrily tugged at her sleeves. She didn't even plan to stay for dinner in the Yu Garden. She picked up her bag and stormed off, saying as she walked, "Jinwan, I'll give you 1 month to wake up. If you don't wake up, I'll take advantage of this time to plot a great scheme to usurp the throne. If I don't put the title of MN Group's legal representative and global regional president on my head, if I don't put your MN Group under my own name, I'll call you Grandma." Auntie Chen, the servant. Jinwan didn't understand. She watched as the beautiful woman who didn't look very annoying stormed away. It was quite a while before she turned to ask Auntie Chen, "Why did she call me Grandma?" Auntie Chen was speechless. It had been about a month and a half since Jinwan woke up. Qin Sighting came to examine her in person every 2 days. In the past, every time she saw a doctor coming to examine her body, she was always afraid and wanted to hide. But since she found how good she used to be on the iPad, she especially hoped that she could recover as soon as possible and remember everything as soon as possible. So she no longer resisted, and even cooperated obediently during the brain examination. She would chat with Qin Sighting, and the irritable mood she had at the beginning gradually disappeared. Most of the remaining blood in the brain has been absorbed. It won't be long before she recovers. After examining her, Qin Sighting turned to pack up the various small, but very advanced medical testing equipment he brought. "I think she's in good condition recently. Didn't you say you were going to take her out for a walk? Let's find a place with good air and calm air to take her for a walk. Basking in the sun is good for the blood absorption of the brain. Now it's winter in High City. It's good to take her to a warm place." Emo Jingshan looked at Jinwan, who was sitting obediently by the bed and listening to them. She had indeed mentioned for a long time that she wanted to go to more places. It seemed that after they got married, the two of them had either been on business trips, or she had gone to T-City to study. They had never gone on a simple vacation together during the vacation. 2 years ago, didn't you buy a large island near Argentina? Later, it was transformed into a tourist resort. In the past 2 years, that island seems to be quite popular. I think we should keep the goodies to ourselves. You can take her to the island to relax, and go to the beach to bask in the sun. Mo Jingshan looked at Jin Wan, who was looking at them expectantly. He curled his lips, and his eyes, which were as deep as an ancient well, slowly revealed a thick smile. You really want to go? Jin Wan nodded repeatedly. Yes. The man nodded lightly. Then let's go. Hearing this, Qin Siding's eyelids twitched. He turned to look at Jin Wan, who excitedly threw herself into Mo Jingshan's arms, and then at Mo Jingshan holding Jin Wan like an old father. He couldn't help laughing. It's true that you are a wife-doting maniac. Now you don't show any signs of degeneration. Instead, you spoil Jin Wan even more. I just made a suggestion, and you agreed to it in less than a minute. You've aroused her curiosity. If I don't agree, do you think she will be disappointed? Mo Jingshan held Jin Wan tightly in his arms, lest she accidentally fell in his arms, and slowly put her down on the ground, whispering, Be careful. Okay, when do I leave? Jin Wan blinked at him. When do you want to go? Tomorrow. Jin Wan's eyes were full of desire. All right, tomorrow. Mo Jingshan looked at the excitement in her eyes, and did not object. Jin Wan was so happy that she threw herself into his arms again, and kissed Mo Jingshan's face. Mo Jingshan liked her recent undisguised enthusiasm and happiness. Qin Siding's lips twitched harshly, and he rubbed his forehead. She could even show so much affection to a sick person. She was really a beast. But then again, Jin Wan was quite cute like this. Chapter 707. The trip to Argentina was soon settled, and the next day, Jin Wan followed Mo Jingshan on the plane. Perhaps it was because the air pressure outside the cabin was too low when they were flying over the Pacific Ocean. Jin Wan didn't feel anything on international flights, but this time, she had a terrible headache. During the flight, Jin Wan rested her head in Mo Jingshan's arms most of the time. When she had a terrible headache, she raised her hand to knock her head. Whenever she did this, Mo Jingshan would hold her hand and gently press her head. Mo Jingshan kept massaging her head until the little woman gradually fell asleep in his arms. His hands didn't stop. Jin Wan slept for more than 2 hours. When she woke up, she saw Mo Jingshan and smiled at him. I just had a dream. Mo Jingshan looked down at her. What did you dream of? I dreamed that you made a lot of cakes for me. There seemed to be 21, and the fireworks on the balcony were very beautiful. Jin Wan found a comfortable position and continued to lean in his arms. Eating cakes is my birthday, right? When is my birthday? Mo Jingshan's hand gently stroked her cheek, and then her hair. Her so-called dream was the time when he helped her celebrate her birthday in T-City. This meant that her confused memories were recovering bit by bit. Her birthday was in winter. On the 4th day in Argentina, it was Jin Wan's 25th birthday. Do you want to eat cake? Okay. After landing in Argentina, perhaps because Mo Jingshan's obsession from when he was in Jing City failed. Even though the island was the territory of Shine Group, he chose a sea view hot spring hotel closest to the seaside. During this season, there were many people on the island, especially the Chinese people who came for a vacation. The hotel that Mo Jingshan had chosen was extremely secluded on the crowded island. Furthermore, the hot spring garden that he had booked was an area that no one else could enter. On the first day in Argentina, Jin Wan was very excited about the blue sea, the boundless pool, and the outdoor hot spring under the scorching sun. She put on her swimsuit and swam around in the water. She knew how to swim, but she didn't remember it. At first, she had to use a swimming ring to swim in the water. Later, when she gradually left the swimming ring, she realized that she could actually swim, so she swam back and forth in the water like a fish. Although he had finally satisfied his desire to bring Jin Wan to the hot spring hotel, he never expected that he had chosen the wrong time. Back in Jing City, if she had dared to swim in the water in front of him dressed like this, he would not have let her off easily. But now, Jin Wan was wearing a white bikini, and her skin was so white that it was almost the color of a bikini. Her long hair swayed behind her like seaweed. Sometimes she went ashore, and sometimes she swam in the water. Mo Jingshan could only order a cup of iced coffee and sit by the side to calm himself. One cup wasn't enough. He ordered another cup with ice. But Jinwan couldn't drink iced coffee. When she was tired from swimming, she came up to him and tried to snatch his coffee. However, Mo Jingshan didn't let her touch the iced coffee. He only called the hotel waitress over to pour her a glass of room temperature juice. Jinwan refused. I also want to drink iced coffee. You'll have a stomachache if you drink it. You can't drink it. Jinwan looked disappointed. Oh. She reluctantly took the juice from the waitress and took a few sips. Jinwan was unhappy because she didn't drink the iced coffee, and the waitress was very envious of her. At first, she was excited to know that the owner of this island, the big boss of Shine Group, had come in person, and then she was envious of CEO Mo's patience and love for his wife. Although Jinwan looked a little like a spoiled child, she didn't show any strange behavior in front of outsiders. So everyone thought that Mrs. Mo had been spoiled by CEO Mo to be so innocent, lovely and innocent. CEO Mo, a legendary figure in the business world, usually kept a low profile and rarely showed up. This island in Argentina was a tourism project of Shine Group in the past 2 years. Although this island was very popular recently, no one expected that CEO Mo would come in person with his wife. However, CEO Mo didn't go to various places to visit or check the conditions of the hotels and the environment. He just accompanied his wife to watch the sea view in the hotel, accompanied her to eat her favorite food, or just sat here and watched his wife swim. And it was really bad for women to drink things that were too cold. CEO Mo not only doted on Mrs. Mo, but also took good care of her body and wouldn't let her touch anything cold. Such a good man was almost extinct on the earth. Not to mention such a powerful and rich man. There were waiters and waitresses from various countries in this hotel. Because Jinwan often swam, there were 3 or 4 Chinese waitresses sent here to serve them. There were no men. Those who could work here were all young and beautiful. But Mo Jingshan didn't even look at them. Obviously, he only had his wife in his eyes. Mo Jingshan envied him to death, but could only watch him eat dog food. It was really torturous. CEO Mo, there's a snack street and a handicraft street near the hotel. These are some of the characteristic streets planned by the island tourist area. It's only a dozen minutes walk from the main entrance of the hotel. Although your wife likes to swim here, I suggest you accompany her to walk on those characteristic streets. There are novelties from different countries. I think your wife will like it very much. The waitress said with a smile as she brought him a new iced coffee. Mo Jingshan's eyes were still on Jinwan, who was sitting by the pool and splashing water with her feet in the water. He didn't move his eyes away at all and asked indifferently, "What's there?" "Everything." When Shine Group planned the scenic area here, it took into account that people from various countries would come here for vacation. So we have almost all kinds of things we can think of. You should have seen these special streets in your subordinates' reports, but you haven't experienced them in person. Why don't you take your wife to visit them this time? Women usually like that kind of place. Mo Jingshan nodded lightly and said no more. Chapter 708. Jinwan was almost addicted to the feeling of swimming in the water. No matter how hard she struggled in the water, she didn't find it tiring. Then she suddenly found that the waitresses near the pool and the outdoor hot spring had all left. She came out of the water, raised her hand to wipe the water off her face, and looked back at the place where Mo Jingshan had been sitting, only to find that Mo Jingshan had also disappeared. She was startled for a moment, and then scanned the surroundings. She did not see any trace of Mo Jingshan, after looking around for a long time. Jinwan's eyes immediately panicked. She hurriedly swam to the side, and was about to go up. All of a sudden her waist, which was submerged in the pool, tightened, and someone was pulling her down. She instinctively screamed, but before she could finish, she was dragged into the water. In less than a second, she felt suffocated underwater. She hurriedly opened her eyes, only to see that Mo Jingshan, who had been sitting above, had entered the pool at some point. At the moment she froze, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her lips underwater, as if he knew she was suffocating, and gave her 2 breaths of air. Jinwan was first startled and then stunned. When she came to herself, The man carried her out of the water because he didn't want her to be too uncomfortable underwater. The moment Jinwan's head came out of the water, her eyes widened. You, she couldn't say a word. The man swam with her to the edge of the pool, let her lean against the edge, and deepened the kiss. Just as Jinwan gradually relaxed in his arms, and instinctively raised her hands to hold his neck, and carefully responded, the man suddenly stopped. His dark eyes looked at the passion in her eyes, and the innocent look of wanting to cooperate with him. He chuckled and said hoarsely, "Do you know how I feel after watching you swim in the water for a whole day?" Jinwan hadn't extricated herself from the kiss. Because of his words, she looked at him with a blush. "How do you feel?" The man's hand was directly under the water. He took her hand and moved it toward his lower body. Jinwan didn't understand what he was going to do, and then her eyes gradually widened. Finally, she said in surprise, "What did you put in your pants this time? You won't let me see it every time." Because her hand curiously touched around, the man, who had only wanted to tease her, instantly let out a muffled groan. He pressed her firmly against the edge of the pool, and abruptly pulled her hand out of the water. Jinwan glared at him. "Stingy. If you have something good, just hide it on you." The man sighed. "You really want to know?" Jinwan nodded very seriously. "Yes. I'll tell you tonight, huh?" The man hugged her. After all, he had sat by the side and endured for a day. Even a few cups of iced coffee could not relieve the pain of being able to see but not eat. At this moment, he held her in his arms, and the woman's soft body obediently let him hold her, as if this could relieve a lot. After hugging her for a long time, Mo Jingshan kissed her earlobe. "You've swum the whole day today. Tomorrow, I'll accompany you out of the hotel. Do you want to go?" "Yes, as long as you accompany me, I can go anywhere." "All right, I'll accompany you." The man lovingly stroked her hair. Jinwan stayed in his arms, raised her head, and kissed his chin. Recently, she often unconsciously liked to take the initiative to kiss him, and every time she did it, Mo Jingshan's heart was comforted. At least when she was inseparable and lacked a sense of security, he could always be by her side. He really couldn't imagine if he was not by her side at this time. But if it were someone else, would she be so dependent on that person? Mo Jingshan rubbed her wet hair again, bent down, and kissed her hairline. The next day, on a characteristic street 10 minutes away from the hotel, Jinwan looked around as if she was curious about everything. However, she held Mo Jingshan's hand the whole time and refused to let go. In 2 days, it would be Jinwan's birthday. Mo Jingshan deliberately looked for a suitable birthday present and had asked someone to make sufficient arrangements. The two of them walked on the street, and whenever Jinwan saw something nice, he would take a few more glances. However, after walking for a while, he found that Jinwan's current situation was that everything she saw was fresh and she liked it. He had planned to see what she liked most now, but the little woman was surprised all the way, as if everything could make her excited. Mo Jingshan asked her everything, and she said she liked it. When he asked her what she liked most, the little woman, who must have watched too many TV shows on the iPad, leaned in his arms, blushed and whispered, "I like you the most." Mo Jingshan paused, lowered his eyes to look at her deeply, and then he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When they passed by several dessert shops, Jinwan pointed to a milk tea shop and said excitedly that she wanted to drink that. Mo Jingshan turned to buy it for her, and Jinwan finally let go of his hand and turned to look at another shop across the street. It was a cake shop that didn't look very big, but both the brand and the decoration were exquisite and luxurious, and the cake samples on display outside the shop were also very beautiful. Jinwan stared at the beautiful cakes and couldn't help walking over. After entering the cake shop, she saw 2 female customers and several staff in work clothes. On the most conspicuous table in the front was a sky blue cake with 9 layers, on which there were dozens of little swans made of various kinds of sugar-turning techniques, and other decorations made of sugar-turning techniques. In short, it was a luxurious, beautiful and delicious cake. Jinwan stared straight at the cake, walked over, and looked at the vivid little swans on it. She reached out to touch them carefully, but because she knew they were food, she paused when she was about a finger away from them. Then she put down her hand resentfully and didn't dare to touch them. Jin-won stared at the cake with her eyes fixed on it. She looked at the cake with a smile on her face. At this time, a sharp-eyed staff came over. Many people here were Chinese. Seeing that Jin-won was dressed like a Chinese, she came over and pushed Jin-won, who didn't dare to touch the cake, aside. "Hey miss, this 9-layer cake has been ordered by the two beauties next to you, and it's very expensive. Don't touch it." Chapter 709. You'd better not touch it. This is food. You don't know how many germs there are on your hands. If you touch it, the beauty who ordered the cake will be unhappy and return the cake. I'm afraid you can't afford to pay for it. Seeing Jin-won acting so timid and ignorant, the staff member rolled her eyes at her and pushed the trolley with the cake aside. Seeing the staff member acting so cautiously, Jin-won didn't understand the contempt in her eyes and asked instinctively, "Is this very expensive?" The staff turned to look at her again and looked up and down for a while. Seeing that she was obviously not wearing cheap clothes and was dressed very fashionably, but she looked silly, she immediately laughed at her for being so naive. "Of course it's expensive. It took us 3 days and 3 nights to make this cake. Not to mention the carefully made decorations and swans. Even the 9-layer cake embryo is not cheap. The price of the whole cake is 158,000 yuan. I guess you just look at it out of curiosity. You can't afford it in your life." Jin-won had no concept of money. When she heard 158,000 yuan, she nodded confusedly. Oh! In her mind, cakes should be very delicious, but how much was 158,000 yuan? It didn't seem to be much, right? Because Shunshin brought her food, necessities, and the hotel she stayed in. Although she didn't see Shunshin pay with a credit card like others, she saw that the prices of many places were 6 or 7 digits. Now she heard him say 158,000 yuan so proudly. So it must be a lot of money, right? "Are you scared?" Seeing Jin-won's dumbfounded expression, the staff member snorted smugly. "If you want to eat cake, go to the cake shop diagonally across the street to buy it. Most of them are thousands of yuan, and the cheapest ones are 200 or 300 yuan. Our shop sells all the high-grade sugar cakes and all the high-end styles in advance. Any cake is 6 digits. You can't afford it. Just take a look and leave. But you can just take a look, but don't touch it. These cakes are very expensive. If you break one, I won't be able to explain it to you." Jin-won nodded obediently and did not speak anymore. She thought about it and felt that it might be really expensive. She had better not let Shunshin spend money on her, so she turned to leave. Seeing her like this, the staff snorted and continued to work, not planning to pay any more attention to her. However, just as Jin-won was about to walk out of the door, a very fashionably dressed beauty came in. The beauty was holding a bag in her hand and walked in at a fast speed. She was in such a hurry that she directly bumped into Jin-won. Jin-won's head couldn't stand the violent impact, nor could it stand the shaking after being hit. Her head hurt, and she couldn't stand firmly. She subconsciously put her hand on the table frame to support herself. She was about to turn around when she suddenly heard a loud curse behind her. "Are you blind? Why are you standing here and blocking the way?" Jin-won jerked back to look at the woman. The woman paused and stared at Jin-won in shock for a long time. Jin-won? Jin-won was a little angry because this woman didn't apologize for bumping into her and was so rude to her. She didn't expect that the woman knew her name and immediately looked at her again. This woman was Yi. She used to be a socialite in High City, but her family moved to Argentina when she was 15 or 16. When they were children, Yi and Ji Menggran had a good relationship. Although Ji Menggran didn't show any obvious rift between her and Jin-won, Yi liked to exclude Jin-won, and even often mocked her since they were children. Jin-won didn't recognize her, and didn't remember those things. Even if she was sober now, she might not be able to recall these unimportant memories immediately. Seeing that Jin-won seemed to be in a daze, Yi thought she was just too surprised, so she immediately walked over and looked her up and down. "Long time no see, Jin-won. If I hadn't seen you here today, I would have almost forgotten that there is a person like you in this world. I haven't asked about the social circle in High City for many years. How are you?" How is Ji-min, Gran? I haven't contacted you and your sister for many years. Jin-won didn't know this woman and said truthfully, I don't know you. Yi paused, and the contempt in her eyes suddenly turned into anger. She had said that she had almost forgotten Jin-won's existence on purpose, but Jin-won looked as if she really didn't remember her, as if she had completely ignored her. After all, she was one of her childhood playmates. How could she forget her just like that? She did it on purpose, didn't she? Yi sneered. It's fine if you don't know me. I don't care if you know me or not. A few years ago, I spoke to Ji-min Gran on the phone. I heard that you seemed to be married, but she didn't say who you married. I didn't have time to contact you later. I don't know who married you, Miss Ji. I'm really curious. Jin-won didn't understand what she said and didn't have any impression of the name she mentioned. She just felt a headache and turned to go out to find Mo Jingshin. Yi thought that Jin-won didn't want to talk about her marriage, so she instinctively suspected that Jin-won was divorced or had an unhappy marriage. So she didn't want to talk about it, so she said sharply, Tut, the eldest daughter of the Ji family seems to be living a miserable life. Alas, don't be too sad. There are many people who are unhappy in their marriages. Just make do with it. Anyway, life is only a few decades, and it doesn't matter whether you feel wronged or not. With that, she said with a smile, But I'm different. My husband is the eldest son of a political family in Argentina, and now he is the general manager of this island resort. My marriage is very happy. At this time, the staff of the cake shop suddenly came over and said fawningly, Missy, do you know this lady? She seems to come in to see the cake. Just now, she almost touched the cake you ordered. After I told her the price, she was shocked. Yi looked at Jin-won with a faint smile. Shocked. Is it necessary? Has the G Corporation declined so much that Miss G can't even afford a cake worth more than 100,000 yuan? Chapter 7:10. Don't say that. She has been good at pretending to be stupid since she was a child. No one can find fault with her, but in fact, she is very cunning, Yi said as her eyes fell on Jin-won's clothes again. No matter how unhappy your marriage is, you still have to live, don't you? But seeing that you still have the capital to be young and beautiful, if you really can't live with your current husband, I can introduce you to some rich men. But most of these men are not young, and they all have wives and children. They just like to come out to play. They can give you a lot of money to sleep with them. Do you want to meet them? Jin-won seemed to have completely blocked out her words. She raised her hand and pressed her forehead with a headache. Seeing her so stubborn, Yi's words seemed to have hit cotton. She clearly remembered that although Jin-won didn't seem to have any personality in the past, in fact, she refused to suffer any losses. Otherwise, how could the Ji family's eldest daughter's arrogant and domineering personality have spread? And Jin-won was also very mean. However, her current expression made Yi feel strange, and she was also unhappy about being ignored. At this time, the two female customers who had been inside came up to Yi. Cousin, we've finished the order for the cake. Do you need us to buy other things for you? No, you can go back first. Oh, by the way, ask my husband to come over, Yi said in a sweet voice. The two beauties nodded and left. Jin-won also wanted to leave, but Yi took her arm and didn't let her go. When Jin-won was impatient, a very tall man came in. The man had black hair, black eyes, and a fashionable beard, but he looked like a Westerner. He was an Argentinian. Honey, seeing the man come in, Yi immediately let go of Jin-won's hand, turned to the man at the door, and hugged him intimately. Then she turned to Jin-won and said, Let me introduce her to you. Her name is Jin-won. We grew up together when we were in High City. The man looked at Jin-won expressionlessly and held Yi in his arms. Honey, I thought you wanted me to help you get the cake. What's the point of introducing a childhood friend like you? As for the cake, the staff here will be responsible for delivering it. Is the matter here settled? Shall we go back now? Great. Wait a minute. I have something to do, Yi said intimately as she turned around to speak to the staff. The staff nodded and immediately said to Jin-won, who was having a headache, Don't block the way. We're going to ship the cake out. Don't delay our business. If Miss Yi's cake can't be delivered on time, you'll have to compensate us for our lost time, Jin-won said with a smile. Jinwan felt that these people were very strange. Their words were all strange. Although she couldn't understand them, she felt strangely uncomfortable. She turned to look at the door. When she saw the figure outside, she felt a lot more at ease. She wanted to laugh but couldn't, so she forced a smile. Yi didn't look at Jinwan's face, so she didn't notice the expression on Jinwan's face. There was no deep hatred between them. She just wanted to bully Jinwan verbally and show off her husband to show her how good she was now. After all, when she was a child, her family was not as rich as the Ji family. Although she had a good relationship with Ji Men Gran, she was still inferior to them in front of the Ji family, which was a psychological shadow. She finally won a round on this island after so many years, and now she was really happy. Honey, let's go. After showing off, Yi put her arm around the man's arm, and the two of them turned around intimately to go out. However, at the moment they turned around, Yi's husband froze and looked at the man who had been standing outside the door for a long time. At first, he didn't dare to recognize him, but after a few seconds his expression changed. COMO? Yi was startled when she heard the way he addressed her, but she quickly understood what was going on. Her husband was sent by Argentina to take charge of this island, but the real boss of this island was COMO, the big boss of Shine Group. The man who could make her husband call him in such a cautious and surprised way must be the legendary boss Missouri, Emo Jingshan. Yi hurriedly put on a polite smile. Hello, COMO. Emo Jingshan's face was expressionless. With his back to the people on the street, his body seemed to be condensed into a layer of cold, emotionless ice, and his frost-like eyes fell on them. Being stared at by his eyes, Yi's legs softened, and she subconsciously looked at her husband. However, when her husband also didn't understand what was going on, Emo Jingshan's cold eyes passed them and looked at Jinwan. Which cake do you like? Jinwan pursed her lips and didn't speak. She knew she was sick and confused. She didn't want to cause trouble for Shunshin, so she just shook her head quietly and didn't say anything. However, when Emo Jingshan spoke to Jinwan in a very patient tone, not only the staff in the cake shop, but also Yi and her husband were stunned. The air in the cake shop seemed to freeze in an instant. COMOU? Yi's husband said tentatively and cautiously. Yi didn't understand what was going on. Emo Jingshan had completely ignored them and walked in. When he brushed past them, Yi couldn't help shivering because of his cold aura. She looked at her husband for help and asked in a low voice, What's going on? Why is COMO here? The point was, why did he seem to be familiar with Jinwan? A woman's sixth sense gave her a very bad feeling. Could it be? Emo Jingshan walked up to Jinwan, looked at her who seemed to be aggrieved, but didn't want to say anything, raised his hand and stroked her head comfortingly. I helped you line up to buy milk tea, but then I couldn't see you. Which cake do you like? N. Jinwan raised her hand and pointed to the 9-layer blue cake behind her. I just thought it looked good, so I came in to take a look, but they said it was very expensive and I couldn't afford it. Is that so? Emo Jingshan didn't get angry, but looked at the staff with a smile. His smile seemed to be cold. Chapter 7:11. When Yi turned around and saw Emo Jingshan gently holding Jinwan in his arms, her eyelids twitched hard, and she had a feeling that she was about to die. The employees of the cake shop didn't understand what was going on. At this time, the manager of the cake shop came down from the production room on the second floor. The moment he saw Emo Jingshan, he was shocked. He had heard the noise downstairs and thought someone had come in to make trouble. He didn't come down to see what had happened, but he knew what had happened. Now that she saw Emo Jingshan here, and how much he cared about the little woman in front of him, the manager staggered down the stairs and hurriedly came over to apologize. COMO, it's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. It's our employees' fault. They're used to interacting with foreigners and have become careless. It's all our fault for not managing them well. Emo Jingshan coldly glanced at Jinwan again. Jinwan didn't understand why these people suddenly changed their attitudes, so she stood in front of him in a daze and didn't speak. COMO, are you here to inspect the island project? Or do you have any other activities arranged? Why didn't you inform us in advance? We could have arranged it, but you. Yi's husband also felt that something was wrong, so he came up and spoke politely and ingratiatingly. Seeing that her husband was being coldly ignored, Yi thought for a moment and moved closer to Mo Ting. She said carefully, "President Mo, it's rare for you to visit an island in Argentina. This unique street is meant for tourists. Why don't we invite you to a quieter place? The people here are all messy and not suitable for you." Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her. "Who are you?" As soon as Yi saw the coldness in his eyes, her heart couldn't help trembling. She raised her hand to take her husband's arm, saying, "I'm his wife, but I lived in High City for more than 10 years when I was a child. I've heard of the Mo family's name, and then I've heard of you, Seo Mo." Seeing the coldness in Mo Jingshan's eyes that could almost penetrate people's hearts, Yi saw Jin Wan's dazed look in front of Mo Jingshan, and felt that although they seemed to be very familiar with each other, she thought that maybe they just knew each other and met here by chance. They shouldn't have a deep relationship. Therefore, Yi took the opportunity to add, "But CEO Mo, when I lived in High City, I knew what kind of person Miss Ji was. She's not a good person. It's better if you don't interact with her. I heard she's the illegitimate daughter of the Ji family." Heard? Mo Jingshan's smile was cold, but his eyes were so dark that no one could see through them. He sneered. "Did she offend you?" Seeing that CEO Mo was talking to her, Yi instinctively felt that her lucky guess was probably right. There should be no relationship between him and Jin Wan. She hurriedly turned around and pointed to the 9-layer blue cake that had not been wrapped up by the shop assistant. "In fact, I didn't offend her. It's just that I had ordered this cake in advance and planned to give it to my husband's great-grandmother. She's already 90 years old, and we specially ordered a 9-layer cake. But Jin Wan was so ungrateful that she insisted on touching it. How can food be touched? If she touched it, would other people eat it?" The shop assistant scolded her, but she didn't seem to be convinced. She kept coming back and forth, making others think there might be a dispute here. But in fact, it's not. Before Yi finished her long speech, Jin Wan whispered in a voice that only he could hear, "I didn't touch it. I know it's for people to eat. I just came over to have a look out of curiosity, but I withdrew my hand before I touched it. I didn't touch it." However, before Yi finished her rambling, Mo Jingshan glanced indifferently at the 9-layer cake not far behind Jin Wan. Because there were too many layers, it had to be carefully placed on the cart. Otherwise, it would easily collapse or shift, which would affect the appearance of the cake. He glanced at the bottom of the cake, which was fixed by a round plate on the cart, and then at Jin Wan. The little woman was very aggrieved, but she didn't show it on her face. Obviously, her good mood for shopping today was affected. "The cake is well made. Push it over, and let me have a look." The man's emotionless voice rang. The clerk of the cake shop paused, and didn't know whether to push the cart over or not. But the person in charge of the shop, who had just run downstairs, did not dare to be negligent at all. He hurriedly pushed the cart to Mo Jingshan and said with a big smile, "CEO Mo, in fact, our desserts and cakes are also very special on this special street. Although they are expensive for a reason. Many of our dessert-making techniques are new, and we make whatever is popular. And look at the technique of turning the sugar. Ordinary cake shops can't make such a lifelike effect." However, as soon as the manager finished speaking, Mo Jingshan raised his long leg and kicked the cart expressionlessly. The 9-layer cake of more than 2 meters immediately fell to one side. In the end, the cake, along with all the cream and sugar decorations on it, fell to the ground, and the cart hit the wall not far away, as if it had lost its balance, making a deafening sound. In an instant, the entire cake shop was silent. Yi raised her head in shock to look at Mo Jingshan's bone-chilling gaze. "CEO Mo?" As if he finally saw the danger in his eyes, Yi's husband stood there in disbelief. Even though the 9-layer cake had fallen to the ground, and the cream on the ground looked dirty, he didn't dare to say a word. "Who gave you the courage to show off your superiority in front of my wife?" Mo Jingshan's voice sounded careless, but in fact it was frighteningly cold. Yi's face trembled, and so did her husband's. Yi stiffened as she looked at the coldness in Mo Jingshan's eyes. As if finally realizing something, She jerked her head to look at Ji Nguyen, who was still standing there with an indifferent expression, and no one could tell what she was thinking. How could it be? Yi was so nervous that her palms were cold. CEO Emma, what did you say? Did I hear it wrong? What, your wife? She even began to stutter when she spoke, praying from the bottom of her heart that she had heard wrongly. Chapter 7:12. Mo Jingshan didn't reply to her, but raised his eyebrows expressionlessly and looked at her coldly. How does it feel to smash a cake? Yi didn't dare to raise her head guiltily. She didn't know what to say and could only reluctantly answer. It's fine, as long as COMO is happy. Mo Jingshan chuckled. I'm happy. Yes, as long as COMO is happy. Yi nodded incoherently. If you want to make me happy, you have to pay a certain price. Hearing the coldness in Mo Jingshan's cold voice that only she could feel, Yi didn't know how she had offended a god like him, and didn't know what to do at all. She was even more flustered. Was Jin Won really his wife? All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan pointed to the nearest 7-layer cake in the window, and signaled the shop assistant with his eyes to push the cake over to her. Yi's eyes froze, and she looked up at Mo Jingshan. Smash it! Mo Jingshan spat out these cold words, and his eyes were cold without any warmth. Yi trembled all over. This. Even though Mo Jingshan was sneering, his smile was still bewitching. Didn't you say that as long as I'm happy? But this, smash it. Mo Jingshan didn't give her a chance to say another word, and stared at her coldly like a knife. Yi was stunned, but she didn't dare to be careless under his icy gaze. She reached out and picked up the 7-layer cake, which was very heavy. Because of this action, she got cream all over her body, but she didn't dare to say a word. After a few seconds of hesitation, she gritted her teeth and threw the entire cake to the ground. The 2 giant cakes fell to the ground, and the cream and cake spread out in a mess. The sweet smell of cream in the air didn't make people feel the slightest sweetness. They only felt the silent smoke of gunpowder approaching. Seeing the broken cake on the ground, the shop assistants didn't dare to speak, and Yi's husband didn't dare to say anything. He didn't even dare to say a word to defend Jin Won. The noise attracted the attention of passers-by, and many people began to watch from outside. Continue. Mo Jingshan's voice was clear and cold. His gaze mildly glanced at the dozens of cakes in the shop, large and small. Many of them were reserved for today, and some were new samples made a few days ago. The employees saw Mo Jingshan's gaze and guessed what he meant, but no one dared to speak, much less step forward to stop the development of the situation. At first, these employees didn't know who CEO Mo was, but since the person in charge of the store was so respectful to him, it was obvious that he was the owner of this island. It was said that the owner of this island had the surname Mo, so it should be him without a doubt. Who would dare to provoke this great god? They simply didn't want to live in Argentina, and this island where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. CEO Mo, this one should be enough. Mo Jingshan ignored her words and coldly glanced at her face. Do you want to smash it? Or do you want me to ask your husband to smash it? Yi trembled all over. If her husband was involved, it wouldn't be easy. After all, Mo Jingshan was the owner of this island, and her husband was the general manager of this island authorized by Shine Group. If this big boss was provoked, her husband would probably. Then the loss would not be as simple as just a cake. She hurriedly turned to pick up the other 2 small cakes in the window, and smashed them hard on the ground. More and more people gathered outside the shop, pointing at Yi, who was smashing the cakes. She had been domineering on this island with her husband for several years, and many businessmen were unhappy with her. Now that they saw her smashing the cakes, they couldn't help talking about her, thinking that she was crazy, and more people came to watch the fun. Continue. Mo Jingshan's voice was still cold, but as he spoke, he glanced at Jin Won, who had been silent. Yi's eyes were red, but she didn't dare to delay and smashed the cakes one by one. Seeing Mo Jingshan's expression, the shop assistant didn't dare to be negligent, and took the initiative to carry the cakes far away from her over one by one for her to smash. The cream and cakes by Yi's feet were almost piled up into a mountain. She was in a mess, and a lot of cream was stuck to her body, so she turned to pick up other cakes and smashed them. Finally, all the cakes in the shop were smashed, and the floor was covered with cream. It was a messy scene that couldn't be cleaned up. Yi just thought she could breathe a sigh of relief, when Mo Jingshan suddenly looked coldly at the shop assistant hiding by the side and said coldly, "Bring all the finished and unfinished cakes in your production room." The shop assistant looked surprised, and so did Yi. But seeing Mo Jingshan's eyes, the shop assistant instinctively rushed upstairs to fetch them. The onlookers outside the shop had almost completely blocked the entrance. Jinwan stood in front of Mo Jingshan and watched this scene. Many strange images of Mo Jingshan appeared in her mind. It seemed that this man often supported her like this and protected her all the time. She paused for a moment, then turned to look at Yi, whose face was as white as a sheet. Jinwan didn't really understand the current situation, but she felt inexplicably good from the bottom of her heart. She was especially happy, and all the unhappiness in her heart seemed to have disappeared. She raised her hand and gently tugged on Mo Jingshan's sleeve, whispering, "Shunshin, I don't want to stay here anymore." At this time, the shop assistant brought down the cakes and desserts from the production room. Seeing Jinwan coquettishly and relying on Mo Jingshan, Yi's face stiffened, and when she saw the desserts that had been brought down, her face turned pale. "What are you doing here? Give it to her. Keep smashing." Mo Jingshan held Jinwan in his arms and gently patted her shoulder comfortingly as he spoke coldly and indifferently. "COMOI, can I stop smashing? There's no more cake on the floor." Yi's eyes were red, and she wanted to beg for mercy. "Don't you like this cake shop very much? Aren't you very proud?" Mo Jingshan said unhurriedly and coldly, "You feel sorry for smashing a few cakes? No, COMOI. I have to remind you that all the cakes smashed today will be under your name." Yi's legs immediately weakened, and she almost fell to the ground, but the ground was covered with cream. She hurriedly raised her hand to support herself on the table by the side, and barely managed to stand. Chapter 713. Looking at the mess on the ground, the manager of the cake shop couldn't help saying in a low voice, "COMO. We've taken out all the cake embryos and semi-finished products. After Miss Yi smashes them, we still have a lot of things to buy. Well, why don't we call it a day?" Mo Jingshan glanced at him coldly. "Do you think this cake shop can still operate?" The manager's expression immediately stiffened, and the faces of the shop assistants turned pale. It seemed that Jinwan was really Mo Jingshan's wife, and Mo Jingshan was trying to stand up for her. As a woman, Yi could tell that she had no choice but to suffer losses, but she was most worried about whether her husband's work on this island would be affected. She looked at Mo Jingshan with red eyes, but at this time, Mo Jingshan ignored everyone's gaze, picked up his cell phone, and dialed who knows where. Investigate the hygiene situation of the Royal Dessert Shop on Wonderful Life Street. Find out the legal person and the boss behind this shop. I want this shop to disappear in 24 hours, and hand over the manager and the boss to the Argentine Department of Industry and Commerce for investigation. In addition, stop all the joint projects between Argentina and Chinese companies. There's no need to follow up." Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, Yi felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Her husband immediately frowned and gave her a reproachful look. Her husband was the eldest son of a political family in Argentina. The cooperation with this island was specially requested by many political representatives of Argentina and Shine Group. After all, the whole world knew that China was a big tourism country, and they all wanted to get in touch with big Chinese companies. This island had been very popular in the past 2 years, and was the main cornerstone of Argentina's tourism development. Now this not only affected his work on this island, but also caused him to lose tens of millions of yuan a year. Now if Shine Group wanted to terminate the cooperation, it would be the loss of the entire tourism industry that Argentina planned to develop. When he returned, he would have to face a huge responsibility, and it was likely that he would never be able to raise his head again. He also understood the seriousness of this matter, and felt as if the sky was going to collapse. Even when Mo Jingshan hung up the phone, Yi was still in a daze. Mo Jingshan coldly watched her. In addition, All the accounts under your names will be frozen in 5 minutes. The island has been ruled by you and your wife for far too long. Many of the sources of funds need to be thoroughly investigated. As for everything in this cake shop, it will be considered as additional debts that you have to bear. At the same time, he calmly looked at the trembling shop assistants. Those who don't want to be implicated immediately calculate the accounts of these cakes and hand them to her, and urge her to settle all debts within 24 hours. Otherwise, Shine Group has the right to ban this shop and send you to the Bureau of Industry and Commerce for investigation. Your names will also be sent to the Consumer Reporting Center in Argentina. The shop assistant's eyes were so wide that an egg could be stuffed inside. Yi was so angry that she couldn't say a word. Jinwan tugged on Mo Jingshan's shirt and looked at him pleadingly. Mo Jingshan knew that she didn't want to stay here, so he helped her solve the problem. Without saying anything more, he took her hand and turned to walk out. When they reached the door, after the crowd outside learned of Mo Jingshan's identity, no one dared to block the way. They consciously opened up a path for them. Mo Jingshan directly brought Jinwan to the milk tea shop opposite. Jinwan finally saw that there was a cup of milk tea and coffee on the round table by the window. Earlier, he was queuing here to buy milk tea for her. She didn't expect that the milk tea would really be sold out. He must have turned around and found her missing, so he came to look for her. Jinwan was led over by him to sit down. She picked up the milk tea and took a sip. It was very sweet. Her mood, which had already been greatly relieved, instantly became even better. She raised her eyes to look at him. Shunshin, did I cause you trouble earlier? The man curved his lips, gently saying, No, it's just that some people don't know what's good for them and seek their own deaths out of habit. Jinwan looked at him, half understanding. She felt that what happened earlier did not seem to affect them. She turned to look out the window. From her position, she could see the scene of the cake shop that was about to be banned. Yi and her husband were arguing about something. The tall Argentinian man, who did not dare to speak earlier, even gave Yi, who was in a sorry state, a slap on the face. He then angrily turned to leave. Yi was pestered by the shop assistants for money. She was battered and exhausted. Outside, many people were pointing fingers and criticizing her. Jinwan watched the situation while drinking her milk tea. Do you want to eat cake? Mo Jingshan asked. She bit on the straw on the cup of milk tea and shook her head. Not today. Let's talk about it in 2 days. Earlier, the smell of cream on the floor was so disgusting. I don't want to eat it at all. The man chuckled softly. It's your birthday in 2 days. I originally planned to bring you to a handmade cake shop to make a cake with you. But since you hate cakes so much, forget it. Jinwan's gaze immediately rose, filled with excitement. Make a cake together? I want to, but I've never done it before. I don't know how. The man lightly curved his lips. Didn't you say it was disgusting earlier? That's because the smell of the cake was too strong. It'll be fine in 2 days. Jinwan reached out to hold his fingers and begged. Shunshin, I want to make a cake. I want to make a cake. I want to make a cake. As she spoke, she placed her chin on the table and looked up at him with wide, longing eyes. I want to make a cake. Mo Jingshan had never seen Jinwan act so openly and coquettishly. When this woman was sober, she was extraordinarily prideful. She also had a temper. His heart seemed to melt from her stare. The man chuckled softly at her. I'll make a cake with you on your birthday. Jinwan immediately sat up in excitement. As she drank her milk tea, she could not hide the anticipation on her face. In contrast to the scene in the milk tea shop, in the cake shop opposite, Yi lost her footing amidst the cake and cream on the floor. Her feet slipped, and she fell into the pile of cream on the floor. When she staggered back up, the shop assistant was still pestering her because her card had been frozen, and she could not pay for the cakes. Although Jinwan did not fully understand, she still felt that he was able to make a shop disappear in such a short period of time. He was also able to make those who bullied her so miserable. Chapter 714. Mo Jingshan accompanied Jinwan for a long time on the special side street. In the past, Jinwan also liked to buy all kinds of gadgets when she went shopping, and now she was no exception. Even though she was ill and her memory was confused, her hobby was still the same as before. After buying so many things, when they returned to the hotel, Jinwan was so tired that she didn't even want to go swimming. She lay on the bed and crawled under the quilt to sleep. Seeing that Jinwan fell asleep very quickly, he realized that she was really a heartless big baby who fell asleep as soon as she said she would. He watched her for a while with a smile, walked over to help her pull up the quilt, pushed back the hair on her cheek, and touched her head. After making sure she was sleeping comfortably, he turned to go to the sofa living room of the suite. As soon as he arrived in the living room, the manager of Shine Group in charge of regional tourism management in Argentina called him and asked nervously, "CEO Mo, do you really want to end the cooperation with Argentina on the Chinese tourism project?" When I received the news, I thought I heard wrong. They said that you have cancelled the project qualification of Argentina. You heard right. Do it. Okay, I understand. Jinwan didn't know that Mo Jingshan could cook. When she was in the Yu Garden, Auntie Chun and the servants made all kinds of delicious and nutritious food for her. When Jinwan woke up, it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening. She tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. She turned to see the light in the sofa living room was on. So she lifted the quilt, got out of bed, and quietly opened the door. But she didn't see Mo Jingshan in the living room. This suite had its own kitchen. Jinwan leaned against the door and listened carefully for a while. She seemed to hear the sound of the range hood in the kitchen. So she tiptoed over and gently pushed open the kitchen's glass door. At a glance, she saw the man standing by the counter cutting vegetables. Jinwan stared at him blankly for a long time. When she realized that he seemed to be preparing to cook, she smiled. Thinking that he couldn't hear her, she tiptoed over, stretched out her arms, and hugged his waist tightly. Mo Jingshan knew she had woken up the moment she appeared outside the kitchen door. However, due to her sudden movement, he paused the knife in his hand and glanced sideways at the little woman, who was holding him and pressing her face against his back. Did you sleep well? I'm so tired from walking on the streets during the day. Did I sleep for a long time? The man casually glanced at the sky outside the window. Fortunately, it's not that long. In fact, Jinwan slept for 5 hours. Sleep was very helpful to the absorption of blood into her brain. So Mo Jingshan did not intend to wake her up at dinner time. However, she was about to wake up, so there was no need to ask the hotel staff to specially send food over. He only asked the staff to send some ingredients and meat, and he would cook. It was just nice for Jinwan to eat the food when she woke up. Jinwan rubbed her face hard against his back and breathed in the scent of his clothes. "Shunshin, your body smells so good." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly, allowing her to continue hugging him as he methodically cut the vegetables. He said mildly, "What? You're so hungry after a night's sleep. Are you going to eat me up?" Hearing this, Jinwan mischievously opened her mouth and bit his arm. She bit him quite hard, but the man did not even frown. He only turned to look at her. "Are you really going to eat me up?" Jinwan blinked at him. "I said your body smells so good. It's not that kind of fragrance, but another kind, I don't know how to describe it, but it smells so good." Mo Jingshan curved his lips. Because his fingers were stained with vegetables, he raised his hand and pushed her little head away with the back of his hand. "Go return to the living room and sit down. There are cut fruits on the coffee table. Go watch TV or use the iPad. When the food is ready, I'll call you to eat. Don't stand behind me like a hungry ghost." Jinwan immediately pouted. "I just want to be with you." Mo Jingshan's smile deepened. "Then go bring a chair over and put it by the side. Sit there obediently and watch." "All right." Hearing this, Jinwan immediately let go of his waist. She turned and ran out happily. Mo Jingshan could not help but furrow his brows when he heard her running. He said to the outside, "Run slowly. Don't fall." Qin Sighting said that he had been accompanying Jinwan every day, and was becoming more and more like a worrisome old father. At this moment, Mo Jingshan finally understood the meaning of the word old father. He really couldn't take a single glance away from her. He couldn't be at ease even for a moment. Jinwan ran out and looked around the room, but could not find a chair. In the end, she ran into the study and brought out a chair. The chair was large and heavy, and it was difficult for her to carry it. After much difficulty, she finally moved it into the kitchen. Mo Jingshan had already turned on the stove, so it was not convenient for him to help her move it. He turned around and saw that the little woman was so tired that her face was red, and she was panting heavily, just to bring a chair in to watch him cook. He sighed with a smile. Just put it by the door. Sit there and watch. Okay. Jinwan obediently put down the chair and sat down like an especially obedient primary school student. She placed her hands obediently on her lap and stared at him. Seeing her gaze, Mo Jingshan chuckled. Were you hungry when you woke up? Jinwan nodded. The hotels on this island are not like those in China. They mainly serve seafood. Although the vegetables and meat are fresh, they are different from those in China. The taste may be slightly different. Try to eat some in? It smells so good. Shunshin, I can definitely eat a lot of the food you cook. Mo Jingshan smiled. You are sick, but your mouth has become much sweeter. Jinwan looked at him. When I was not sick, did I eat the food you cooked? Yes. Did I say it was not delicious? Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows and glanced at her. She did not say this, but every time she ate it, she would look particularly unwilling, as if she did not want to eat it. She would never admit that it was delicious, but she would almost always finish it. In the end, when she was full, she would lean against the side and continue to play the role of a little ingrate. Especially after she returned from London, she did not admit it even once. No, you also liked to eat in the past, but I didn't have much time to accompany you. And you didn't get to eat it often, the man said and quickly put a dish on a plate. Chapter 7:15. Mo Jingshan glanced at the freshly cooked rice by the side. Wait a little longer. It's a little hot. Jinwan made a no sound and continued to sit there and wait patiently. When she could finally eat, Jinwan jumped up in joy and couldn't help hugging Mo Jingshan again. Mo Jingshan was hugged by this little woman all the way. It was as though a koala bear was hanging from his body. He carried the food out, placed it in the dining room, and then hugged the little woman hanging from his body. He lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead tenderly. All right, go wash your hands and eat. Jinwan raised her head and kissed him hard on the chin. She was about to turn to wash her hands when she suddenly paused and turned to look at him, saying, Shunshin, why is your body so hot? Mo Jingshan rubbed her hair. Maybe it's because I've been busy in the kitchen for a long time. It's a little hot. Go wash your hands. Jinwan hesitated for a moment, and then turned to the bathroom. When it was time to eat, Jinwan asked Mo Jingshan to eat with her. She sat close to him and picked up food from time to time to bring it to his mouth, insisting on feeding him a few mouthfuls. Fortunately, the dishes Mo Jingshan made tonight were relatively light, and the two of them were used to it. In the past 2 days on the island, they could hardly live without seafood. Finally, they had a normal meal. Jinwan had always liked his cooking. Even if she didn't remember it, she still ate with great relish. In the end, her stomach was almost bulging. She shouted that she couldn't eat anymore, but she still stuffed a few mouthfuls of food into her mouth. In the end, she was so full that she lay on the sofa and refused to move. By the time they finished eating, it was past 10 o'clock at night. Jinwan had slept for 5 hours and was not sleepy at all. She simply sat on the sofa and watched TV. Mo Jingshan brought a blanket over for her and turned to work in the study. As the night deepened, Jinwan was enjoying herself watching TV when she vaguely heard Mo Jingshan's low, heavy coughing coming from the study. She thought she had heard wrong and pricked up her ears to listen for a while. Not hearing anything, she continued to sit on the sofa and watch TV. After who knew how long, the door of the study opened. Jinwan turned back and did not see his expression. She only saw him enter the kitchen, pour a glass of water, and return to the study with the glass. It wasn't until 1 o'clock in the evening that Jinwan gradually felt sleepy again. However, she went shopping during the day and went straight to bed when she came back in the afternoon. She didn't take a shower at all. She still loved cleanliness. She got up and went back to the bedroom to take a comfortable bath. After the bath, she didn't know where she put the hairdryer. In the morning, Mo Jingshan had dried her hair. so she didn't pay much attention to where he put it. Jinwon walked out while drying her hair. She looked around for a hairdryer but could not find one. She could only shout toward the study. Shunshin, I want to blow dry my hair. Where did you put the hairdryer? There was no response from the study. Jinwon asked again, but there was still no response. Feeling strange, she walked over and carefully knocked on the door. Seeing that there was no movement inside, she was just about to ask if he was busy when she suddenly heard a muffled sound of something falling to the ground. The sound wasn't soft either. When Jinwon heard the sound, she subconsciously pushed the study door open. The light in the study was soft, and the computer on the table was open. Mo Jingshin was reading the company documents. However, Jinwon's gaze abruptly shifted down, and saw Mo Jingshin lying on the ground. Shunshin. Jinwon saw that Mo Jingshin was lying on the ground and was startled. She rushed in and squatted by his side. She saw that his eyes were closed, and his handsome brows seemed to be wrinkled from discomfort. Jinwon stared at him in a daze and tentatively reached out to push him twice. Shunshin? What's wrong? Mo Jingshin opened his eyes slightly and saw the obvious fear in Jinwon's eyes. He instinctively wanted to get up to avoid scaring her, but after trying for a long time, he could not get up. He could only force himself to speak hoarsely. It's nothing. Go find the hotel staff and call a doctor over. Shunshin, what's wrong with you? Jinwon hurriedly nodded and reached out to touch his body. She found that his body was even hotter than when he was eating. When she saw that he had closed his eyes after speaking, she anxiously cried. Shunshin, don't scare me Shunshin, wake up. Mo Jingshin furrowed his brows but did not open his eyes. Call a doctor. Right, call a doctor. He had just asked her to call a doctor. Jinwon hurriedly stood up. In the end, she was in too much of a hurry, and her leg knocked hard against the chair by the side. Her entire body staggered and almost fell. She endured the pain, and finally managed to steady herself. She rushed to run out, but she had only taken a few steps when she was suddenly attacked by a strong wave of dizziness. Her entire body swayed, and she leaned heavily against the door. Her head was pressed against the door, and she felt that it was especially heavy. No matter how hard she tried, she could not lift it up. Jinwon's head throbbed as she raised her hand to place it on top of her head. After a long time, she was unable to calm down. She used her hand to knock against her head and shook it. It was as though there was a thread of clarity reminding her that she had to call a doctor immediately. She could not delay any longer. In the end, she gritted her teeth and endured the pain in her head that felt as though it was about to explode. She staggered out of the room, opened the door, and shouted in a panic, Is there anyone here? Someone come call a doctor. There was a hotel staff in charge of this suite nearby. When they heard Jinwon's panic cries, they thought that something had happened and immediately rushed over. Mrs. Mo, what's wrong? The moment they saw Jinwon's pale face, lips, and body trembling, the staff thought that something had happened to her and reached out to support her. However, Jinwon shook her head and pointed in the direction of the study. Go call a doctor. The staff understood her meaning and quickly walked in. When she pushed open the door of the study, she was shocked to see Mr. Mo lying on the ground. She was startled and hurriedly picked up the phone to inform the other staff downstairs. They would immediately send the best doctor here and make the necessary arrangements. Then she struggled to help Mo Jingshin up and said with a frown, Mr. Mo's body is very hot. He must have a fever. Mrs. Mo, did he eat anything tonight? Jinwon returned with a shocked expression. She shook her head in confusion. There's only rice, vegetables, and cooked beef. That shouldn't be. How could he have such a serious fever? When Jinwon heard that Mo Jingshin seemed to have a serious fever, her eyes, which had just been crying, immediately turned red again. I don't know. As she said this, Jinwon bit her lip and felt that she was particularly useless. Shunshin was so good to her, but she did not even know in advance that he had a fever and was unable to help him. She was so useless. When would she become the amazing version of herself in the video? Chapter 7:16. Although Mo Jingshin had suddenly fainted due to a high fever, He was able to open his eyes slightly by the time the doctor arrived. He hoarsely instructed them not to scare Jinwan, and to wait in the living room with her. He also instructed them not to say too much to scare her. After examining him, the doctor asked, "COMO, do you have a history of stomach problems?" Mo Jingshan lay on the bed with his eyes closed, speaking hoarsely, "Yes. 2 years ago in Los Angeles, I worked day and night, and didn't eat regularly for a long time. I was once sent to the hospital because of stomach spasms." "That's right. You're very healthy, but you have a history of stomach problems. You can eat anything on a normal diet, but it's not suitable for you to eat too much cold food for a long time. We've lived here for a long time, so we know the habits of the people here. Your main and secondary meals on the island for the past 2 days must have been mostly seafood. Your stomach was already a little uncomfortable. Did you drink anything like iced coffee after that?" Mo Jingshan raised his hand to rub his forehead, speaking hoarsely with a sigh. "I drank a few cups." The doctor nodded. "As expected, it's an acute gastritis caused by multiple stimuli. It's not a big problem, but it's best for you to eat a light diet. Right now your body temperature is very high. After your fever goes down, take some antibiotics on time. You'll be fine in 2 days. There's no need to worry." Mo Jingshan did not say anything more. He glanced at the hotel staff who had just entered the bedroom. "Where is she?" "Mrs. Mo is in the living room. Don't worry, we've been comforting her. But she seems to be very worried about you. Her complexion is also very poor. Do you want the doctor to take a look at her?" Mo Jingshan raised his hand with difficulty, stopping the doctor from looking for her outside. "She's very resistant to the touch of an unfamiliar doctor. Just accompany her quietly." The staff nodded and did not say anything more. Westerners rarely took injections unless it was really necessary. After the doctor gave Mo Jingshan some medicine for his fever and gastritis, he instructed the hotel staff to prepare an ice pack to lower his body temperature. After confirming that there were no other problems with Mo Jingshan's body, he left. The doctor also said that he would stay in another room in the hotel tonight. If anything happened, he would immediately rush over. He told Mr. Mo not to worry. Mo Jingshan indifferently nodded. After everyone left, the hotel staff asked if they needed someone to stay behind to take care of him. However, Mo Jingshan indicated for them to leave, in case Jinwan was not used to having so many people in the room. It was already late at night, past 2 o'clock in the morning. Jinwan stood in the living room, but was not sleepy at all. Standing by the window, she could see the azure sea. After the doctor and the others left, she did not dare to enter the bedroom. She heard from them that Shen Shen's fever was very serious, and that he needed to rest after taking the medicine. She was afraid that she would disturb him if she entered, so she had been standing outside. But after more than an hour, the more she couldn't see him, the more worried she became. She leaned forward and leaned her forehead against the floor-to-ceiling window. She stared blankly at the dark sea outside the window. On such a large island, one could see the ebb and flow of the tide at a fixed time every day. Right now it was the time when the tide rose around the island. The calm sea slowly rose in the night, and the waves were much more turbulent than during the day, repeatedly beating against the beach and the reefs in the distance. Jinwan stared outside in a daze, and many scenes kept circling in her mind. She closed her eyes and banged her head against the floor-to-ceiling window. It did not hurt much, but when her head banged against the cold window, it seemed to relieve the inexplicable swelling pain in her head. She closed her eyes, but the scene of Mo Jingshan falling on the floor of the study kept replaying. Jinwan slowly furrowed her brows and raised her hand to press hard against her increasingly painful head. All of a sudden, she heard 2 light coughs from the bedroom. She opened her eyes with a jerk and rushed to run in. The fever medicine that Mo Jingshan had taken should have taken effect. His forehead was gradually covered in sweat, but at the same time, the medicine allowed him to fall into a deep sleep. Seeing the sweat on his forehead, Jinwan walked over to the bedside. She took out a tissue from the box by the side and wiped it messily for him. Not long after, she saw that his forehead was covered in sweat again. Jinwan continued to wipe it for him with reddened eyes. As she wiped, she said, "Shenshin, it's all my fault. I don't even know how to take care of you." In his sleep, Emo Jingshin seemed to have heard her voice. He furrowed his brows, but did not wake up. Jinwon reached out to pick up the ice pack that had fallen from his forehead and touched his forehead. She instinctively felt that his temperature was not as high as before. She stared at him for a moment and seemed to have thought of something. She threw away the tissue she had been holding and ran into the bathroom to fetch a basin of clean water. She then brought a clean white towel back to the bedside and wet the towel in the water. She wrung it until it was half dry and then, bit by bit, wiped the sweat off his forehead. After more than half an hour, he finally stopped sweating. Jinwon placed her hand on his forehead again. After confirming that his fever was no longer high, she brought the water back to the bathroom. For the entire night, Jinwon would occasionally return to the bedside to watch Emo Jingshin. She would also occasionally head to the living room to stand by the window and watch the waves outside. When the sky was about to brighten, she instinctively turned to enter the kitchen. Not long after, she came out and returned to the bedroom. 8 o'clock. Emo Jingshin opened his eyes. His fever had already subsided during the night. After a good night's sleep, the moment he woke up, he no longer felt any discomfort. He was someone who rarely got sick, and it was rare for him to have a fever. Now that the fever had subsided, it was no big deal. However, he turned to see the little woman sleeping by the bedside. Seeing that Jinwon did not seem to have a good rest, the man slowly raised his hand and rubbed her head. The moment his hand touched her, Jinwon abruptly woke up. She raised her eyes to look at him. "You're awake." Emo Jingshin's raised hand suddenly stiffened. He stared into her eyes. Although her eyes were still drowsy from waking up, the sobriety that he had not seen for a long time struck his heart harshly. Jinwon thought that he was feeling unwell. She stood up and reached out to touch his head. "Your fever is gone. Is your stomach uncomfortable? I used the leftover rice from last night to make porridge, and have been cooking it in the rice cooker. It's just right for you to drink. I'll go get it for you." Jinwon spoke and turned to leave. However, Emo Jingshin did not take his eyes off her back. Regardless of whether it was her gaze or the tone of her voice, he abruptly stood up, tugged the blankets off the bed and walked out. He watched as Jinwon turned to close the small window in the living room, and then turned to head to the kitchen. He abruptly called out, "Jinwon." Jinwon's footsteps paused. She did not turn back. "Are you all right?" The man's voice carried a slight probing tone, but it carried at least 90% certainty. Jinwon did not speak, and continued to walk toward the kitchen. Emo Jingshin directly walked over. With his long legs, he caught up with her in a few steps. He held her shoulders and forcefully turned her body around. He lowered his eyes to look into her eyes. "Tell me, are you all right? Awake? Have you remembered everything?" N. Dash. Chapter 717. The moment Jinwon was turned around, she could not hide the redness in her eyes. "Isn't it all because you scared me? Otherwise, I would have continued to be silly for a while longer." There was no need to say more. Just this sentence alone was enough to move Emo Jingshin. The man's hands held her shoulders tightly. He looked into her eyes. "Who am I?" Jinwon stared at him. After holding it in for a long time, she finally said, "Emo Jingshin." She placed a heavy emphasis on these 3 words. There was even a sense of distance between them. However, this stubborn and unyielding temper was truly her. "I'll go get some porridge for you. You didn't seem to be sick before, but you suddenly collapsed on the ground. I was so scared that my soul almost left my body," Jinwon said as she pushed him. However, not only did he not push her away, but the man who had always been indifferent and calm suddenly smiled, as if he couldn't hide it no matter how hard he tried. He was about to hug her when Jinwon quickly blocked his chest. "Hey, let me get a bowl of porridge first." The man ignored her actions. He pulled her hand down and held it firmly in his palm. He then pulled her into his embrace. Jinwon could not resist and could only hammer his shoulders several times. She could only hear the man's low and hoarse voice by her ear. "Your head doesn't hurt anymore?" Jinwon paused and shook her head. "It was much better a few days ago. Some things always appear before my eyes. It's as though when I sleep, I'm awake for a while. However, I'm always asleep, but many things in my dreams are clear and no longer as messy. Yesterday, I was scared by you again. Otherwise, I might have been able to continue acting like a fool in front of you for a few more days. The doctor said that you can't be agitated right now. Otherwise, your emotions will be affected. If I had known that agitating you would be effective, I would have long since laid on the ground. The man rubbed her head as he spoke. Were you badly frightened last night? Nonsense. A grown man suddenly lying on the ground. Even I would be frightened when I'm normal, much less when I was in that state. Jinwan poked his waist as she spoke. Can you let me go to the kitchen to bring the porridge out? If it boils any longer, it'll turn into soup. I'll drink the soup too. There's no rush. Jinwan. But I haven't eaten breakfast yet. I want to eat too. I don't want to drink rice soup. Mo Jingshan's hand rubbed the back of her head, as though to confirm if there were any problems with her head injuries. He then lowered his eyes to look at her. He saw that although the little woman was saying all sorts of lukewarm words, her ears were already completely red. Even her fair neck was stained with a pink hue. Feeling the man finally let go of her, Jinwan quickly took 2 steps back and raised her hand to rub her cheeks and ears unnaturally, as though trying to cover the red and hot places. Thinking that he couldn't see it, she turned and rushed into the kitchen. The porridge had been cooked for a long time, and did not really turn into soup. After all, the white rice on this island did not have the same texture as the ones in China. The texture was slightly hard, but now that it was cooked, it was fragrant, sweet, and soft. The texture was just right. Mo Jingshan had a high fever last night, so this porridge was relatively light and easy to digest. Jinwan was not sure if she had really recovered, but at the very least, she felt that she was no longer as muddle-headed. Although she felt her head was especially heavy and tired when she tried hard to think, and her brain even hurt a little, it was likely that she needed to recover bit by bit. Last night, she stood by the window in a daze for a long time. For a long time, she forced herself to think about things and straighten out those messy and disorderly memories bit by bit. After those memories were straightened out, many things that she did not understand were gradually solved, and she began to remember more things. For the time being, she did not overuse her brain. If she tried too hard to think about more things, she would not feel uncomfortable. For her to be able to recover in such a short period of time, it was likely due to Mo Jingshan's meticulous company and care. On the other hand, it was likely that the upgraded targeted medicine developed by Dr. Qin's friend in the Research Institute was extremely effective. She was already extremely lucky to be able to keep her life. Right now, Jinwan's heart was not thinking about anything else. She found that she had walked between life and death more than once, and it was truly a different feeling. After scooping the porridge, she turned to leave when she abruptly saw Mo Jingshan leaning against the kitchen door with his arms crossed. A pair of black eyes that were as calm as the sea was watching her. Jinwan walked over, and was about to bring the porridge to the dining table to call him to eat. However, before she could even take 2 steps, the man's hand had already reached over. Using the advantage of his height and long legs, he could almost completely hug her. He reached out and picked up the spoon in the bowl in front of her. At the same time, he scooped a spoonful of porridge and put it back. Jinwan did not understand what he was trying to do. She could not help but turn back to look at him, only to see that the man only tasted a mouthful of the porridge she cooked. It seemed like he had not eaten anything she cooked for a long time. It was clearly just porridge, but Jinwan subconsciously observed his expression. How does it taste? I put a small amount of fine salt, and minced vegetables, and meat powder in the porridge. After all, you need to replenish your strength after sweating from a fever. It won't do if there's no taste at all. The man took a sip and did not speak. He gestured for her to turn around. Jinwan turned around, and allowed him to continue tasting it. After standing in front of the kitchen door, and casually drinking 2 or 3 mouthfuls, the man looked at her expressionlessly. Didn't you taste it first? I cooked it in a hurry, and have been cooking it in the rice cooker. I just opened it earlier, and haven't had a chance to taste it. Jinwan glanced at the bowl in her hand as she spoke. She reached out to pick up the spoon he had just used to take a sip. However, the moment she moved, The man picked up the spoon in the bowl and took another sip. Jinwan. She thought that he did not want her to use his spoon. She only glanced at him and did not say anything. However, just as Jinwan was about to turn around to place the bowl on the table, the man bent down and approached her. Jinwan abruptly looked at the face that remained incomparably handsome despite being sick for an entire night. Her gaze faltered. "What are you doing?" The man smiled mildly and was about to kiss her. Jinwan finally realized that he intended to feed it to her. However, she understood his intentions. The man paused just as he was about to press his lips against hers. Then Jinwan heard the sound of the man swallowing the porridge. So what exactly was he trying to do? Jinwan looked at him strangely. Seeing the little woman's confused expression, Mo Jingshan sighed with a smile. "Forget it. I just had a fever last night. If I feed it like this, it'll be easy for me to infect you." Chapter 718. Mo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. "You mean I can kiss you?" Jinwan. Before the incident in Los Angeles, no matter in Jing City or anywhere else, didn't he kiss her whenever he wanted to? Was he trying to take advantage of her now? Or was he beginning to restore his old cunning character, knowing that she had let go of the knot in her heart? Jinwan rolled her eyes at him. No. With that, she quickly went to the dining table, put down the bowl, and hurried back to the kitchen. As she walked, she said, "You eat first. I'll get myself another bowl. I'm so hungry." Mo Jingshan glanced at her and did not say much. He went to the dining table as he was told. When Jinwan came out with another bowl, she also brought 2 sets of cutlery over. She handed the cutlery to Mo Jingshan. The man watched her as she lowered her head to eat the porridge and said casually, "After you woke up, you refused to look at me even when you were eating. So a few days ago, the little rascal who kept hugging and kissing me, and even clung to me and refused to leave, was it you?" Jinwan. A person's subconscious would inevitably have some unrestrained side, such as the childish side or the wild side. But what she showed Mo Jingshan was the most innocent, childish, pure, and harmless side. Jinwan bit the spoon, raised her head to glance at him, and asked vaguely, "Don't you think that's stupid?" "You're not stupid. It's a little cute, especially when you clung to me and refused to leave, and kept asking me if I had something good in my pants." Jinwan. Calm down, calm down. She couldn't let him off so easily just because of a life-and-death crisis in Los Angeles. Jinwan soaked in the pool and held her breath for a long time. But this time, her brain injury was indeed serious. In the past, she could swim, and she could hold her breath in the water for much longer than now. Now, after holding her breath for a few seconds, she would have a headache because of the lack of oxygen. She had to come out of the water to take a few deep breaths before diving back in again. After repeating this for a long time, the time he could hold his breath gradually lengthened. He kept chanting in his heart, "Calm down, I have to calm down." Originally, Jinwan did not plan on coming out to swim again. However, the doctor who came last night came to check on Mo Jingshan today to see if his gastritis had improved. Jinwan did not enter. She stayed on the sofa in the living room for a while and planned to come out for a walk. Mo Jingshan knew that she was no longer muddle-headed and allowed her to come out, but she was not allowed to leave the hotel. This hotel's business was very good. There were many people in the front, but only the exclusive area near the suite and the separate swimming pool were empty, so Jinwan simply came here. By the side, there were new bath towels and swimsuits delivered to her according to her measurements every day. Jinwan sat by the pool for a while before changing into her swimsuit and entering the water. The doctor had already left. Mo Jingshan only had a sudden attack of gastritis. His fever had subsided, and he had taken some anti-inflammatory medicine and eaten a light diet for a few days. He should be fine now. The man stood in front of the window and looked at the round blue swimming pool in the green grass opposite the window. The white figure swam around like a mermaid in it, and then very consciously practiced holding his breath to train the intensity of oxygen in his brain. He watched as Jinwan swam in the water. She was no longer as excited and curious as she was a few days ago. After swimming for a while, she would rest for a while, and then continue swimming. After watching for a long time, 2 housekeeping staff knocked on the door at 2 p.m. and came in to clean. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was still in the room, they respectfully said, "Mr. Mo, we're coming in to clean. Are we disturbing you?" Mo Jingshan calmly responded and did not say much. Hearing CEO Mo's response, the 2 men hurriedly began to tidy up the various rooms in the large suite. Hearing the sound of the carpet cleaner, Mo Jingshan slowly shifted his gaze away from the figure in the water. He seemed to have thought of something and turned to ask the housekeeping staff, who was wiping in the living room, "Is there any fresh roses in the hotel?" The housekeeping staff carefully recalled, "Yes, Mr. Mo. As you know, this is the only 7-star hotel on this island. Every day, we receive thousands of roses by air. A large portion of them are used to decorate Western food, or to place petals on the beds of newlyweds who come here for their honeymoon. Furthermore, they are all very expensive Bulgarian roses." She recalled that back in Jing City, there was a brat who was not afraid of death, who gifted Jinwon a large bouquet of roses. In the end, he threw it into the trash can in front of her. Mo Jingshan calmly asked, "How many roses are there today?" "We haven't used them yet. We usually prepare them in the afternoon, and only use them in the evening. Have them send them over again. Bring me the ones we have now." "All right, Mr. Mo." Hearing Mo Jingshan's orders, the housekeeping staff did not dare to delay, and immediately went out to make arrangements. Half an hour later, Jinwon was still practicing holding her breath in the pool. She had checked on the internet, and found that for a head injury like hers, there would usually not be much of a problem. At worst, there would only be occasional headaches. If she did not want to have such side effects, she had to keep exercising after her recovery. She could also go swimming frequently to practice holding her breath and train the intensity of oxygen in her brain. This way, her recovery would be faster. As long as she persevered, it would not take long before even this most common side effect would be eradicated. After practicing for a long time, she could hold her breath in the water for 12 to 13 seconds. Every time she came out of the water, she would feel her breathing become smoother. This time, she persevered for an extra second. The moment Jinwon's head came out of the water, she opened her eyes and was startled. Beads of water flowed down from her eyelashes. She rushed to brush the water from her face and eyes to the side. She saw that the man who was supposed to be resting in the room was standing by the pool. In his hand was a bouquet of tender and beautiful roses. They were red, especially bright and beautiful red roses. Jinwon was stunned. "What are you doing with the roses? Don't you like them?" The man looked at her and casually said, "The hotel had them, so I brought them over." Jinwon. He really did not hide it at all. He said that it was specially flown over from a certain country for her, and that it was fine if he said it just to move her. But in the end, he told her that it was already in the hotel. She remained in the pool. Originally, she wanted to say that she did not want them. However, when she raised her eyes, she saw that the man who had always been calm and collected was holding the bouquet of roses, as though he was devoutly waiting for her to come out of the pool. Jinwon quickly lowered her head and dived back into the water. Chapter 719. When they finally reached the shore, Jinwon was carried out of the water by Mo Jingshan. Because she had deliberately hidden in the water for too long, her head hurt. When she finally came out, she swayed in the pool and fell back into the water. This time, she was not prepared to hold her breath, and immediately choked on a mouthful of water. Thankfully, Mo Jingshan's eyes and hands were sharp, and he directly fished her out. However, the moment he came out, Jinwon was still lying in his arms and coughed several times against the ground. She choked uncomfortably and coughed so badly that her head hurt. Mo Jingshan was worried that there would be a problem as soon as she recovered. He directly picked up the towel from the recliner and wrapped it around her body. At the same time, he helped her dry her head and lowered his head to check her complexion. "Are you all right? You choked so badly and coughed so hard. Does your head hurt?" Jinwon nodded. Before she could speak, the man abruptly lifted her up along with the towel. The moment Jinwon's feet were in the air, she clearly felt the man's concern. Thus she instantly felt evil. She suddenly raised her hand and moved it up his chest, softly saying, "Shunshin." Mo Jingshin's arm that was holding her instantly stiffened. Jin Won could clearly feel the man's body stiffen, and the sudden low pressure. How afraid was he that her sobriety today was only a flash in the pan. He was afraid that she would return to her original state of being so muddle-headed that she didn't even know how to fight back when she was bullied. After experiencing so many dangers, life and death, she walked out step by step. At this moment, Jin Won suddenly felt that she had gone a little too far. In the days after her accident, Mo Jingshin had endured all that he should and shouldn't have endured. He protected her by his side and never left her side. At this time, if she continued to joke about her own physical condition and recovery, it seemed that she had really gone too far. Jin Won raised her eyes and secretly glanced at the man's expression. She tugged on the clothes on his chest. When the man felt that her actions were like a spoiled child from a few days ago, he lowered his head to look at her, only to see that Jin Won was smiling brightly. "I'm joking." The man clearly didn't think that this was an interesting joke. He didn't have the slightest intention of laughing. He lowered his eyes to look at her shoulders and swimsuit that weren't wrapped in a towel, and her hair that was still half wet around her neck. His expression was subtle. "Are you joking?" Jin Won didn't think much of it. She pursed her lips and said, "Just now, in order to get me out of the water, you threw the roses you were going to give me into the water. Can't I make a joke to ease my regret? Didn't you say you didn't want it?" "I didn't say anything." "Okay, I'll make it up to you on your birthday tomorrow." She didn't say anything more. She leaned her heavy head on his shoulder and let him hold her. She let him hold her and gave a lazy, "Oh." The man carried her out of the pool and back to the hotel. After entering the door, Jin Won was about to get down from his arms. However, the man directly kicked the door shut. Not only did he not put her down, but Jin Won felt the man's arm around her waist with great strength. She was then thrown onto the sofa by the man. Her back bumped against the sofa lightly, but it didn't hurt. At the same time, her entire body was pressed against him. She raised her head in a panic, only to be met with the man's lips that were pressing down on her. Mo Jingshin kissed her fiercely, almost wantonly. He nibbled lightly, and then moved deeper. Taking advantage of the moment when she was about to faint, he pried open her teeth and attacked without any gentleness. He forcefully invaded every part of her mouth, deeply and lingering. Originally, because she had just woken up and her body couldn't withstand any torment, he didn't plan to do anything to her. But she had the ability to provoke him. "Are you joking, in?" The man hooked her tongue and tangled with it. At the same time, when he let go of her lips, his low, husky voice pressed against her lips. Jin Won heard the danger in his tone. Her entire nervous senses were drowned by him. His breath, his taste, seemed to penetrate every inch of her skin. She wanted to resist but couldn't. Being kissed by him like this, she finally realized that when the man carried her through this door, he was like a beast that had been suppressed for a long time. Step by step, he tolerated her, let her, doted on her and protected her. In the end, he was still angered by her. In an instant, it was all based on his own will, and he was unbridled and powerful. He had indeed tolerated for a long time. Since that time, he had promised not to mess around with her without her permission. Later, after being separated for so long, he couldn't bear to frighten her, let alone provoke her. He had endured for a long time. Even when this little woman climbed on top of him again, and again when she was unconscious, and asked him innocently how they slept together as husband and wife, he had endured all of this. But this little woman was really courageous. As a result, under the forcible catalysis of all the expectations and longing he had accumulated, his desire to let her go surged terrifyingly. In fact, since the moment he pressed against her, Jin Won could clearly feel his lower body pressing against her. Kissed softly, she called out his name. Her voice was like a weak cat's. "Mo Jingshin." The man's voice was hoarse, but it was too sexy. "And I've just gotten a little better, and you're already so shameless. Can't you just endure for a little longer?" Her seductive yet unconscious voice provoked the man's body to want to go further. He chuckled lowly and huskily. "I haven't endured. Haven't I endured long enough?" Then why didn't you take the opportunity when I was climbing on top of you earlier? I was so proactive back then. The man chuckled lowly. Sheen Sighting said that you only have the IQ of a 10-year-old. Your eyes are too naive. I'm not a pedophile. I really can't bear to do it. Jean Wan. Her face turned even redder and hotter. Then what's wrong with my eyes right now? Am I not naive now? If I wasn't naive, I would have stayed in London until I died and never returned to High City. He lowered his head and sucked on her ear, causing her to moan sensitively. The man chuckled lowly, right by her ear. Right now in your eyes there's me. Don't flatter yourself. This is just a reflection. I'm just going to swim, and you're running around in front of me. Otherwise, how could there be you? Feeling the man's actions becoming more and more excessive, this undisguised intimacy caused Jean Wan to blush from her face to her ears. Don't. Chapter 720. Jean Wan narrowed her eyes at him. You know I'm only 25 years old. There are so many modern women who only get married and have children in their 30s. Why don't I wait another 8 to 10 years? Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. I can wait 8 to 10 years. I don't mind being an old father by then. However, no matter how healthy Elder Mo is, I'm afraid he won't be able to wait that long. I have to give him the chance to watch the child grow up and… Speaking of Elder Mo, she thought about how he had yearned for a great-grandson for so many years. In the end, let alone a great-grandson, even his own grandson and granddaughter-in-law were too busy to return to the Mo family to accompany him. Thankfully, the old man was always open-minded and did not make things difficult for her. Otherwise, he would have raised his walking stick and smashed the Yew Gardens gates. Furthermore, it was not that she did not want to have children. It was just that she had never thought that she would have children. If you don't want it, then wait a few more years. There's no rush. The man's hand comforted her head. Or if she really did not want it, he could accept it. He just did not say this. Jean Wan's heart moved. Because of what he said. And because of the image of Mo Jingshan holding the child and feeding it with a bottle in front of her mind. When Xia Tian gave birth, her family's little police officer was really a classic example of a tough man with tender emotions. Outside, he was definitely a high-ranking military officer. At home, the scene of him changing the baby's diapers was really shocking, including the scene of him holding the baby and feeding it with a bottle. If that face was Mo Jingshan's, she suddenly looked at Mo Jingshan's face, which was inches away from hers. It was hard to imagine how great Boss Missouri looked when he held the child. If he could treat her so well, after having children, he would most likely become a nanny, right? So when she had a miscarriage, how could his heart not ache? It was just that he was too good at concealing all his emotions and never revealed them. It was just that no one saw the heartache he purposely hid. Perhaps it was because Jean Wan's expression was too serious. Or perhaps it was because he really did not plan on doing anything to her when she had just woken up, and did not want to affect her recovery. The man took several deep breaths on her body, kissed her between her breasts, and suddenly released her. Jean Wan raised her eyes to look at the man who moved away from her. Actually, it's not that I can't give birth. Mo Jingshan's eyes were filled with her reflection. Hearing her words, he smiled mildly, and helped her up from the sofa, letting her sit by his side. She was about to tidy up her messy clothes when the man pulled her into his arms. Wan. N. The man's voice was so gentle that Jean Wan couldn't help turning to look at his handsome face. The man slowly said, Back then, you were pushed out of the car by Su Shui on the Los Angeles highway. Because of the severe fall, you miscarried. Feng Ling said that you went through emergency treatment at that time. Was it very painful? Jean Wan's face was calm, and she simply leaned her head on his shoulder. Under the shadow of the light, her long eyelashes fluttered like a fan. No matter how painful it was, it couldn't be more painful than the pain you felt when you used your own body to block that giant truck. I always believed that although you were seriously injured in that car accident, you still survived in the end. It must be our baby who died first. He begged God to let his father accompany his mother for decades more, and not be separated by death so early. Or, Jean Wan raised her hand, and casually played with the buttons on his shirt, as she had done a few days ago, as if she was used to leaning on his arms, even though she had woken up. She said softly. At that time, he just knew that the trajectory of my life needed to be changed, and that it was not suitable for him to be born at that time. So he obediently went back first and waited for the right time to meet us again. It must have been very painful. I heard that you had a lot of bleeding in the emergency room. And because you were pregnant, you couldn't have an anesthetic injection. The pain made you faint again and again. Back then for Jinwan, it was not just physical pain. She clearly knew that the child could not be saved. While suffering in human pain, she also had to worry about Emo Jingshan, who was being rescued at the same time. All the tribulations in life seemed to find her in an instant, as if all the pain she had experienced in her previous life gathered together at that moment and was on the verge of exploding. And after that incident, he also pushed her away with his own hands. It must have been painful. That was why she was unwilling to bow her head, even after learning the truth. But no matter how stubborn she was, it was true that she loved him, and it was also true that she could not let go of him. It seemed to be very painful. For a period of time, when I touched my stomach, it was flat, and I was not used to it. But at that time, your parents were worried sick about you, and I didn't want them to feel pressured, so I never said it. I just sent you a text message when I was very depressed, once a day. I've read those text messages. And you said it. I know. I read every one of them. I know. Seeing that she seemed to have forgiven him, and did not want to argue about such a trivial matter, Emo Jingshan held her slightly cold little face, and bowed his head. Wan, I apologize. Jinwan's hand that was playing with his buttons involuntarily tightened because of his words. And then she grinned. To show your sincerity, you have to spend more time with me on vacation. MN Group has been under Xia Tian's management. If I suddenly go back now, if she knows that I've recovered, I bet she can't wait to throw the company back into my hands. It's rare for me to relax, and I don't want to go back so early. He never expected that this little woman would put forward such a condition. Emo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. That's it. You, the great Emo Jingshan, don't lack anything, and neither do I. For so many years, the only thing we lack is to put down our work and really come out to relax together. Besides, after we got married, we didn't have a honeymoon. Now this is just a compensation for me. Jinwan said matter-of-factly. The man smiled. All right, it's up to you. Then let's play for another 2 months. Jinwan said as she calculated the time. First, we'll play here and in Argentina for a few more days, and then we'll pass by the United States. I'll go to New York to watch a fashion show, and then I'll go to Los Angeles to see the place where I studied when I was a teenager. And then I'll go to London to show you the place where I lived in England for 3 years, and the old site of my company. And I'll go to Ireland, Greece, and Egypt. In this way, is 2 months not enough? If 2 months is not enough, then 3 months. If 3 months is not enough, then a year. I'll accompany you all the time, and? Is it really okay to let the big boss of Shine Group accompany me on vacation everywhere? Chapter 721. She had been carried out of the pool by Emo Jingshan. Right now, she was still wrapped in a messy bath towel and swimsuit, and her wet hair hung down behind her shoulders. But after all, Jinwan had just entered the formal recovery period, and still needed a little more rest. Swimming was a very physically exhausting exercise. After speaking only a few words, she leaned into his arms, feeling a little sleepy. Emo Jingshan carried her into the bathroom, let her take a hot shower, change into pajamas, and then came out. However, when she came out, he didn't know whether this little woman had gotten used to being in his arms for the past few days, or just wanted to cling to him. Emo Jingshan was originally waiting on the sofa for her to come out and help her dry her hair. But when Jinwan came out, she directly sat on his lap and continued to maintain the posture she had before taking a shower. It seemed that she planned to lean on his arms and sleep. Just like before, many times when she couldn't sleep at night, or was excited or acted coquettishly, he would hold her like this to coax her to sleep. Although she was already awake, it seemed that she had accidentally developed this habit. It was a habit that Emo Jingshan was very satisfied with. He stroked the woman's half-dry hair. Are you going to sleep now? Your hair hasn't been dried yet. I've rubbed it with a dry towel for a long time. It'll be dry in a while. You don't need to dry it. Jinwan leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. I'm so sleepy. I want to sleep. The man stroked her head. Seeing that she was really too sleepy, he didn't stop her. Jinwan leaned into his arms in the same position as a few days ago, as if she could fall asleep quickly in this position. He heard the little woman's breathing gradually become even, and she was no longer as nervous as a few days ago when she fell asleep, or even occasionally woke up. However, she still habitually grabbed the buttons of his shirt with her hand. This action did not change. Mo Jingshan suddenly remembered the year when he had just returned from America, when he found out that Jin Wan was the girl who rescued him from the Los Angeles River, and when he met her for the first time in High City. It was at a medium-sized business banquet in Sea City. There seemed to be light in her eyes, and she was cunning and quick-witted. Unlike other young ladies who looked around and compared with others, she was blindly drinking champagne and desserts in the corner. As long as no one was paying attention, she would steal a glass of wine to drink. In front of others, she obviously looked like a noble lady, but behind others, she didn't have any manners at all, but had a unique cuteness. The second time he met her, she didn't know about it. She was kidnapped by the Ji family's rival in the mall, but at that time, she didn't know what happened. She was blindfolded, tied up, and carried away in an inconspicuous van. He sent someone to rescue her, and rescued her from the van, before she was almost taken out of High City's highway. However, she, who was only 19 years old at that time, was already frightened. It was not convenient for Mo Jingshan to show up, so he didn't remove the black cloth from her head. She didn't know whether the people who took her away were other kidnappers or someone else. Even when he carried her to the car and patted her comfortingly, she still tensed up in his arms nervously. The fear of a little woman made her originally soft body tense, as if every part of it was about to break. In the end, he couldn't bear it and said lightly, I was sent by your father to rescue you. It's not convenient for me to show up, but I'll send you back to the Ji family immediately. Don't be afraid. After saying these words, he didn't know if it was because his tone was too calm, but he could clearly feel her body gradually relax. However, after relaxing, she couldn't help trembling. Her hand inadvertently patted on the buttons of his shirt and tightly gripped them, as if this action could give her a sense of security. Later, even when he sent her back to the police station near the Ji family, she still didn't say a word. After all, it was not convenient for him to show up at the Ji family's home, and could only send her back through the police. He also had to report her kidnapping to the police station. Otherwise, the Ji family was likely to encounter the revenge of this kind of business enemy. Back then, why did he insist on marrying Jin Wan? When he learned that the young lady was kind to him, he could have used other methods to repay her. He could have also helped the Ji family's business rise to a higher level, allowing her family and her life to be happier. However, when his grandfather suggested the marriage between the two families, he only thought that it was fated. Furthermore, he didn't hate Jin Wan. In fact, he had always remembered the fact that the young lady didn't even know the difference between a first kiss and artificial respiration. If they were fated to be together, he didn't mind marrying her and teaching her well. However, when he truly made up his mind to make her Mrs. Mo, it was this small incident that she might have long forgotten, or perhaps even didn't know it had anything to do with him. At that time, Jin Wan's entire body had shrunk into his embrace, trembling. Her hands had unconsciously gripped him tightly, holding on to him helplessly and stubbornly, refusing to let anyone hear her cries. Perhaps it was because he suddenly wanted to hold her in his arms to comfort her, that he changed from letting nature take its course to personally opening the Mo family's doors to welcome her into his life. Jin Wan had really fallen asleep. Mo Jingshan placed her down gently and stood up to bring the hairdryer to gently dry her hair. He then waited for her to adjust to the heat on her head and blow dry all her hair before carrying her back to bed to sleep. The next day, Jin Wan's birthday, the moment she opened her eyes, she realized that she was 25 years old. The moment she opened her eyes, She smelled the fragrance of noodles. Jinwon got up and went out. As expected, she saw that Boss Missouri had prepared breakfast for her. It was a simple bowl of egg noodles, which could also be called longevity noodles. On this island, although there were ordinary ingredients, there weren't many of them. There weren't many that tasted good either. Although it was simple, the smell was very fragrant. She couldn't help but walk over. She did not stand on ceremony, and picked up the noodles to eat as she said, "Usually I always want to eat seafood. In the end, after coming to this island for a few days, I realized that eating too much of it makes me sick. It's not even as appetizing as these simple dishes. If this was a bowl of seafood noodles that I made, would you still eat it?" The man asked in return. Jinwon took a bite of the poached egg in the noodles while thinking carefully. She replied, "Of course I would eat it. So, the only problem lies in whether or not I personally made the food." The man smiled at her. "Eat it. I'll accompany you out after you're full." It seemed like this was indeed the problem. Chapter 722. Jinwon had thought that Mo Jingshan was going to take her out for something, but it turned out that he had really booked a cake-making workshop in advance, and all the staff were off today, leaving only a very famous dessert chef in Argentina to help. Previously, he had promised her that he would take her out to make cakes. After all, she was not sober at that time, so she did not remember it. However, he had kept it in mind, and had even arranged it in advance. Although Jinwon could cook, she really did not know how to make cakes. However, she remembered that Mo Jingshan had personally made more than 20 cakes for her overnight, and each of them looked very beautiful. She had tasted some and found them delicious, although she had ruined many of them. So was there anything this man did not know how to do? Was there anything that could stump him? Jinwon stood in the production room, wearing the apron and clothes that the dessert chef had prepared for her. It was pink, and there was also a hat. After putting it on, Jinwon could see her reflection in the window as she passed by. She looked like a real pink and tender dessert shop attendant, quite down to earth. On the contrary, Mo Jingshan did not change his clothes. He was wearing a white shirt and light-colored trousers. Earlier, when he passed by this street, many foreign young girls could not help but secretly glance at him. This man was dressed all in white today. He looked clean, handsome, and did not look like a man who was almost 30 years old at all. He was so eye-catching that Jinwon kept standing in front of him to block his face, but she could not block the eyes of those women. At this moment, she saw this man standing in the production room helping her with the cake. She looked at the man's rolled-up shirt sleeves and revealed a small part of his strong arm. She glanced out again and saw some young girls quietly leaning against the transparent window and looking in. She felt a little jealous. Her husband, who attracted so much attention wherever he went, could not be hidden. Today, he was dressed like a living Prince Charming. Ba. An old Prince Charming who was almost 30 years old. He was indeed eye-catching. Now that Jinwon was dressed like this, those women who kept peeking inside probably thought he was the boss of this dessert shop, or some distinguished customer. And she was just a dessert shop attendant accompanying him. Now that she was dressed like this, it further confirmed their thoughts. They did not even glance at her, but were all staring at the handsome man, who could even make desserts inside. However, they were just looking outside. When she was in school, she and Xiatian had also peeked at good-looking boys. It was not illegal to look at them like this, but now Jinwon's heart was surging with jealousy. She simply turned around and walked into the production room behind with the cream she had just beaten, which was also only separated by a transparent glass. Mo Jingshan, who was concentrating on making the cake for Jinwon, felt something was wrong. There seemed to be someone following behind him, except for a few days ago when she was a little muddle-headed and would hug him from behind when he was cooking. Jinwon, who usually would not wander behind him like this, had been following him closely like a sesame seed on a sugar cake. When he turned to go to the oven, she followed him. Wherever he went, she would go. Her eyes were shining brightly. Every time he turned back, she would try her best to attract his attention, as if she could press all the stars in the sky into her eyes to attract his attention, so that he would not notice the group of people peeking at him outside. Mo Jingshan casually took the matching cream, chocolate, and so on that the dessert chef handed over. Jinwan stood by the side and watched him intently. She did not look at the cake, nor did she learn how to make it, but only looked at him. Mo Jingshan returned to the workbench. Jinwan was tired of standing, relying on the fact that she was still recovering and could be considered half a patient. She moved a stool and sat opposite him. At the same time, she picked up the extra cake that had been cut off and took a few bites. It was very sweet. The cut-off part tasted perfect, not to mention the unfinished cake in front of him. The onlookers outside probably found that there was something between Jinwan and the extremely handsome man inside. After all, she was so clingy, but the man was not impatient at all. He even specially asked the dessert chef to prepare some delicious food for her to eat, lest she was hungry or bored. Although she was dressed like a waiter, she did not look like one. It was not until they saw the man smear the cream on Jinwan's nose that the women outside finally understood and left resentfully with a pained expression. Jinwan raised her hand to wipe the cream off her nose, then sat there with one hand supporting her face and continued to watch him. In fact, she did not know what kind of man Mo Jingshan was. It could even be said that she could not even figure out what kind of husband Mo Jingshan was. She had seen him wearing a suit in the company when he had meetings with elites from home and abroad. Sometimes he was cold and unapproachable, but he was so swift and decisive that it was impossible to predict what kind of decision he would make next. Sometimes, he would talk and laugh with people who he rarely praised, but that handsome expression had a sense of propriety. He never opened his heart to others, and he was a calm and unruffled superior. She had also seen him change into a comfortable shirt or homeware. His slender figure and clean, warm aura were always refreshing. His fine black hair was on his gentle brows. When he looked at her, there was never any hidden warmth in his eyes. Every time he looked at her, she couldn't resist it. She had also seen how decisive he was when he was bathed in blood in Cambodia. She had seen how he had endured silently and cooperated with 11 base without eating for many days. She had seen how intimidating he was when he held a gun. She had seen how he had lost his mind and almost shot that person because she had almost been defiled by that Cambodian. She had seen his many faces. Mo Jingshan, this person, seemed to be hindered by his identity as the eldest grandson of the Mo family. Or perhaps it was because of his responsibility and the constraints of the family, but he was always able to control his identity and emotions very well. In her memory, there were very few times when he lost his mind, but the few times he lost his mind seemed to be related to her. Jinwan did not eat the food that the dessert chef brought her. Instead, she ate the leftovers of the cake that Mo Jingshan had cut off. After all, this was made by him. Even if the extra pieces were cut off, she could not bear to throw them away. Mo Jingshan glanced at her contentedly sitting there eating the cake and sighed with a smile. He said that he wanted to learn how to make a cake on her birthday. It was more like he made it for her. Chapter 723. It wasn't that eldest Miss G did not participate in making the cake. At the very least, when they were decorating the cake, Jinwan could be considered to have come up with a plan. Halfway through, Jinwan refused to remain idle. She took the opportunity to smear a lot of cream and melted chocolate sauce on Mo Jingshan's body. The man's haute couture shirt was slightly wrinkled by her, and there was a lot of cream stuck on his body. Most of it was white, the same color as his shirt. There were also some other colors. Under his helpless expression, he appeared even more disheveled. Aside from Jinwan, no one could imagine that there would be a day when Mo Jingshan would be bullied by a woman to this extent. He did not even dare to retaliate. This shop's ingredients for making cream and cake are all very good. The taste is also sweet but not greasy. Jinwan licked the remaining cream on her fingers and turned to tease the man who was disheveled by her. Did you come here in advance? Otherwise, how would you know that this shop's homemade cake would be so delicious? Didn't you insist on making the cake with me? Mo Jingshan began to undo the buttons on his shirt. If I didn't find a shop that suits your taste, with your temper, who knows how many more thorns you would find to make things difficult for me? Do I look like someone who would make things difficult for you? Mo Jingshan had already unbuttoned 3 buttons on his shirt. However, because this was still the bakery, and there were passers-by outside, it was not convenient for him to take it off. He glanced at her. "What do you think?" She looked at the beautiful shape of his collarbone as he unbuttoned it, and the arm that was revealed under his casually rolled-up sleeves. The hem of his shirt was also loosely tied around his waist, but in her eyes, it became a sexy curve. Ah, what a feast for the eyes. Jean Wan took the opportunity when the dessert chef left to wrap her arms around his neck and hang herself on him. Naturally, cream was smeared all over her body. She tiptoed and planted a kiss on his cheek. "When we were in Tea City, did you personally make those 21 cakes one by one like this? But they were all wasted by me at that time. And you didn't even say that you were the one who did it." She looked at his narrowed eyes and felt remorseful for what she had done in the past. "But I still haven't learned how to make a cake today. I originally planned to make you 30 cakes when you were 30, but I guess this plan can only be put on hold. I'd better change to another way." He clearly knew that this little woman was deliberately playing tricks. She just didn't intend to make any cake, but found a bunch of shameful excuses for herself. Mo Jingshan's gaze darkened. He held on to her waist. Meanwhile, the reckless Jean Wan continued to nag incessantly. "Today's birthday is enough. I'm not a child, nor is it some special anniversary or year. Spending a holiday with you on this island is the best birthday present for me. I don't want anything else." To show that she was not that shameless, Jean Wan kindly added, "But to show your sincerity you can— Hey, Mo Jingshan, put me down." This man, who was used to seeing the world, was indifferent. He even freed a hand to steady her waist, causing her to hurriedly climb onto him. "To show your sincerity, don't force me to sleep on the sofa tonight. Otherwise, even on the sofa, I'll still eat you up." His lips brushed against her ear, making a flirtatious sound. The last part of his voice was a little upturned, and a low chuckle. "You know, when I don't intend to touch you, even if I hold you to sleep, I'll at most put something good in my pants. I'll never touch you, but if you force me, I don't care if you're in the recovery period or not. If you really can't, I'll be gentle in." When she heard that he would put something good in his pants, Jean Wan's face had already turned red. When she heard his next words, she buried her face in his neck. How could she be so silly at that time? How could she ask such a question? The Diary of the Dessert Chef. The legendary Mr. Mo specially brought his wife here to make a cake to celebrate his beautiful wife's birthday. The entire shop was closed, and I was the only one left here to accompany him in making a cake. Perhaps it was because making a cake wasn't that difficult. Otherwise, why would Mr. Mo become more energetic as he worked? Later, I went outside to retrieve something. When I returned, I saw that Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo's bodies were covered in cream, but the cake was undamaged. It seemed like the couple had used the reserve cream to have a big battle. She didn't know if it was because the weather on the island was too hot, but there were a few mosquitoes that had flown in. Otherwise, why would there be a few red mosquito packets on Mrs. Mo's neck? The air conditioning in the production room was turned on just right, and the hygiene was very good. Usually even a fly wouldn't be able to fly in. Was it because the mosquitoes were too small, so they flew in? To express our shop's apology, I specially went upstairs to bring out the special mosquito repellent I usually brought with me, and offered it to Mrs. Mo. I also loudly expressed my sympathy for the hateful bumps on her body, and my hatred for the mosquitoes that could actually fly into this room. I didn't understand why Mrs. Mo would suddenly glare at Mr. Mo with a flushed face. When I turned to look at Mr. Mo, he had a serious expression on his face as he continued to decorate the birthday cake in front of him. Perhaps the cake was more important than the mosquito bumps on Mrs. Mo's body? We stayed on the island for another 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, because she would be leaving for America tomorrow, her second destination was New York. She also planned to go to the place she used to study in Los Angeles. After all, she hadn't been there on her previous trips to Los Angeles, so she stayed in the room to study the specific route for the next few days. She was planning where to go first, then where to go, and then where to go. In just a few short days, they only occasionally ate the various delicacies provided by the hotel. Of course, that excluded the raw and cold seafood. The rest of the time, he personally cooked in the kitchen of this suite. To satisfy her appetite, Jinwan had gained at least 2 pounds. Emo Jingshan had just received a call from the company. She had nothing to do in the room, so she got up and went downstairs. She sat on the lounge chair by the pool and looked at the iPad in her hands. She planned the vacation route and checked the customs of the various places she wanted to go. Chapter 724. At night, the aroma of barbecue wafted out from a barbecue buffet area at the back of the hotel, filling the cool sea breeze with the smell of barbecue. Jinwan turned to look at the faint smell from a distance. She saw the red bits of meat scattered on the ground in the distance, creating a lively and beautiful scene after the barbecue. Jinwan stood up and moved closer. There was a family of foreigners, about a dozen of them, who had come to the island for a holiday. They had specially booked the only area in the hotel that allowed barbecue. When they saw Jinwan, they were very hospitable. She thought she was just a traveler staying in the hotel. But when the waiter by the side reminded her that she was the wife of the owner of this island, they were even more surprised and invited Jinwan to eat with them. The family was very hospitable. Jinwan's English was very fluent, and it did not affect her communication with so many people. In the end, as they ate and chatted, she got high and couldn't help but drink 2 cans of beer. After all, this was the last night on the island, and the first stop of their holiday. Jinwan was in a very good mood. And as soon as she was in a good mood, she couldn't hold back her bottom line. Naturally, he forgot the promise he made 3 years ago that he would not drink less, and even not drink with unfamiliar people. The side of the pool downstairs was empty, except for the iPad placed on the recliner. Jinwan's figure was nowhere to be seen. Emo Jingshan picked up the iPad on the recliner and heard the sound of people eating and drinking, and the smell of barbecue nearby. He guessed that Jinwan had not eaten barbecue for a long time, and was probably attracted by the smell. As expected, when the waiter outside saw him come down to look for Jinwan, he came over and said that she had gone to the barbecue area. By the time he arrived, Jinwan had already gulped down 2 cans of beer and was chatting happily with a bearded man in his 30s. It was unknown what they were talking about, but the bearded man laughed heartily and handed a can of beer to Jinwan. Jinwan did not reject him and opened the can with a caw sound. She was about to drink when she suddenly sensed someone's gaze. She paused and turned to glance at the entrance of the barbecue area. The moment she saw the man standing under the cold moonlight and watching her indifferently as she prepared to drink, Jinwan's movements stiffened. She had been a little high earlier, but now she was abruptly sober. Right now, she was a recovering patient. She either pretended to be weak or said that it hurt here and there. In any case, she bullied him endlessly and then found an excuse to show weakness so that he wouldn't fight back. Now she even dared to drink alcohol. Ahem, I have something to do. I'll go. Thank you. Jinwan greeted the family with a smile and nodded politely to them. At the same time, she told the waiter to bring them more seafood, meat, beer, and other things. The barbecue would be put under her and Emo Jingshan's names, so they didn't have to pay. She then stood up and walked over. When she approached Emo Jingshan, she heard the man's mild voice. You came here to eat barbecue and drink beer while I wasn't paying attention? Jinwan. I smelled it and came over. I couldn't help myself. Emo Jingshan glanced at him again. Didn't you say your stomach hurt in the afternoon? It doesn't hurt anymore? For the past few days, every time this man pressed her down on the sofa and kissed her, she would take the opportunity to pretend to be sick. At this moment, she unnaturally raised her hand and scratched her ear. And it doesn't hurt anymore. Well, it's good that it doesn't hurt. The man glanced at her again, took her hand and turned to leave. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any intention of pursuing the matter, Jinwan was slightly relieved and obediently followed him back. Fortunately, she had eaten quite a few skewers of barbecued meat just now. Otherwise, she would probably be very hungry now. Just as they were about to return to the room, the man held her hand in the elevator with one hand and put the other in his trouser pocket. He glanced sideways at her. Did I starve you? No. If you weren't hungry, why would you freeload off others? Isn't he barbecuing? If you want to eat barbecued meat, you can tell me. Is there anything I can't satisfy you? You just had gastritis a few days ago. Let's just eat something normal or light. You can't eat barbecued meat or anything like that. I only went to chat with him and ate a few skewers. Mo Jingshan glanced at her again. Seeing that Jin Wan's gaze was very sincere, he did not say anything more and brought the little woman back to the room. Originally, Jin Wan thought that this matter was just a small interlude. However, when Mo Jingshan went to prepare dinner, she had just finished showering when she smelled the scent of barbecued meat. She walked out while drying her hair. When she entered the kitchen, she saw that on the stove in front of Boss Missouri, there was a small barbecue equipment that the hotel staff had brought in. There were various meat skewers, shrimp skewers, vegetable skewers, chicken skewers, and other essential ingredients for barbecuing. The smell was even more fragrant than the skewers she had earlier. Jin Wan's hand, which was holding the towel, froze on top of her head. She stared dumbfoundedly at the back view of the man dressed in a white shirt who was grilling skewers for her in the kitchen. However, the fragrance of vegetable porridge wafted out from the rice cooker by the side. This meant that he still planned on sticking to a light diet for a few more days. However, in order to not treat her unfairly, he specially barbecued meat for her and let her eat her fill. It would be a lie to say that she was not touched. Jinwan walked in. She looked at the skewers of fresh meat and various ingredients before turning back to look at the man. I can't eat so much by myself. The man did not turn back. He was currently sprinkling seasoning on the skewers. He calmly said, "Eat as much as you can. Eat until you're full. Otherwise, you'll have to freeload off others." Jinwan was embarrassed. She was only freeloading off a meal. How did she offend him? It's fine if you're just freeloading off. Just a few skewers of meat is enough to make you lower your guard. You even dare to accept alcohol from anyone. Jinwan. Only then did she realize that earlier, when he went to look for her, she seemed to be chatting with that family's 30-year-old son. She was talking about what he had seen and heard, as well as some of his experiences studying in China. That was why Jinwan was chatting and laughing with him for so long. It seemed like Boss Missouri had misunderstood. Jinwan held back her laughter and did not explain. She stood by his side and stared at the vegetable skewers that were already done. She anxiously asked, "Can I have a taste first?" The man glanced at her and did not reply. Chapter 725. Seeing the little woman's greedy appearance, Mo Jingshan said, "You're really useless." However, he still casually picked up a skewer of vegetables that was no longer hot and fed it to her. Jinwan smacked her lips in satisfaction, saying that it was delicious. She then contentedly turned to change her clothes, preparing to eat the rest of the food that Boss Missouri had personally roasted. The result of eating too much at night was that she could not sleep no matter what. Although the 2 cans of beer that Jinwan drank did not make her drunk, it made her more energetic. After eating the barbecue, she took a shower to prevent the smell of barbecue from covering her body. She then paced back and forth in the room for half a day, digesting the food for a while before sitting down. Because she had eaten too much earlier, it was mainly because Boss Mo's barbecue skills were exceptionally good, especially the seasonings that he had prepared. If they were sold as barbecue seasonings, many barbecue shops would most likely pay a high price for them. After all, they were truly delicious. After much difficulty, she could finally lie down. Jinwan tossed and turned on the bed, unable to fall asleep. She was most likely thinking about her journey and plans after returning to America. She was slightly excited, but also slightly reluctant to part with the slow life on this island. Mo Jingshan had been by her side the entire time. However, as she lay down, he sat against the headboard. In his hands were several documents that he had just printed out. In order to accompany her to sleep, he had specially printed out the electronic versions. It was convenient for him to accompany her while not affecting his work. Still not sleeping? Hearing the little woman turn over again, Mo Jingshan glanced at her. It was indeed time to sleep, but she just could not. Jinwan placed her head in his embrace. I can't sleep. Do you have anything you want to say? Or is there something on your mind? Mo Jingshan held her hand, placing it on his body. He half sat up, allowing her to use his body as a pillow. The belt of his nightgown was not tied very tightly. Following his collarbone, she could faintly see the perfect lines of the man's chest and abdomen through the gap. I'm thinking if we stay outside for too long, will it be bad? Get to the point. His hands formed a subtle arc by her side, cleverly encircling her in an embrace. His dark eyes fell into her eyes, but it seemed like he was abstinent. He didn't want to do anything, but he domineeringly wrapped her in his scent. I think it's better to shorten the trip. Wouldn't it be too heartless of me to leave the company to Xiatian and pretend to be sick? You have a conscience with everyone else, but you like to play the role of an ingrate in front of me. Mo Jingshan's hand brushed against her cheek. His tone seemed to be smiling, but it also seemed to be gritting his teeth. I'm being serious. I've already taken you away from Shine Group and occupied you for several months. Wouldn't it be too much to continue to occupy you? Yes. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly grabbed the belt of her nightgown that was gradually loosening. Are you done? Can I sleep now? Then shouldn't we go back earlier? The man did not answer and instead said, I don't think your condition is as serious as you say. You even dare to drink. What else can't you do? That's not what I'm talking about right now. Before she could finish speaking, she realized something was wrong. The pitiful belt around the waist of her nightgown was nowhere to be seen. His fingers had already reached under her open collar. His palms seemed to know her body like the back of his hand. It seemed like he was carelessly moving around, but it caused her to tremble slightly. Jinwan instantly entered a guarded state, alarm bells ringing loudly. Didn't you say you want to sleep? She did not have time to struggle, and was already pressed under his arms. I don't see that you're sleepy. This is because you need to vent the alcohol. Why don't I accompany you to vent it? Even at this time, he did not forget to show off his black-bellied nature. It was clearly what he wanted to do, but he still blamed it on her drinking. To deal with a little heartless person like you as expected, I can't be too soft-hearted. Why don't I make breakfast for you tomorrow morning? Let Boss Missouri have a good sleep? I definitely won't make you wake up early to make breakfast for me again. The arrow was already on the bowstring, but the prey still wanted to struggle on its deathbed. I can't wait. The tip of his tongue circled down her neck, leaving behind a decadent red mark. She instantly released an uncontrollable whimper. Amidst the broken words, it was already impossible to distinguish his name. His voice reverberated by her ears. Sometimes it was as though he was far away, and sometimes it was as though he was close by with warmth. She closed her eyes, as though she had fallen into the deep and boundless ocean in his eyes. Old rules, pay with your body. The man's voice was so heavy that it could easily capture her soul. Usually, when Mo Jingshan wanted to let her go out of consideration for her, even when she could no longer endure it, he would have an astonishingly strong self-control. Even if he had to take a cold shower for an hour, he would definitely not make things difficult for her. However, when this man did not intend to let her go, she would always be helpless against his ferocious plundering. Earlier, when he called her a little white-eyed wolf, she felt that she was slightly better than him. However, in the face of his sudden kiss, it was instantly crushed. It turned into dust and flowed away, melting into his bottomless abyss. The man easily pried open her teeth. It appeared as though he was attacking fiercely, forcing her to retreat. Even her breathing became erratic. However, his hands were extremely patient, as though he was afraid of scaring her. She could only grip his sleeves tightly, struggling to not let herself fall. After a long time, the man finally let go of her, as though giving her a chance to breathe. However, in a moment of carelessness, the man's hand had already reached for her waist. His hot palm seemed to carry a low fever, burning her lumbar spine and making it numb. When his slender, well-jointed fingers slid across her skin, there was a different kind of pleasure. His fingertips were like a swimming fish going anywhere. In the past, every time she resisted and resisted, it was because of the knots in her heart that should not have existed. Now, she could only say that she was almost frightened by her own passion. She did not dare to face herself who actually missed him so much. But Gu Yuang had already bloomed into a gorgeous flower. She couldn't hide it even if she wanted to. She swayed her vines and bound her heart towards him. Jin Wan's iPad was thrown on the bedside. At this time, the screen suddenly lit up, and the news of Shine Group's new cooperation project popped up. Although Mo Jingshan did not personally go back to participate, as the CEO, he would definitely put his photo on the news. In the photo, he was still immaculately dressed. The collar of his shirt and suit were tightly fitted. From the corner of her eye, Jin Wan caught a glimpse of the photo of the news that had lit up on the screen. She immediately had an evil thought. She looked at the man who was currently doing things to her body, and bit down on his Adam's apple, that was rolling up and down. Chapter 726. However, the result of this bite was that Mo Jingshan reached out to hold the back of her neck, lowering his head to kiss her harshly. Due to her provocation, his kiss became more and more forceful and domineering. It was so passionate that it was almost rough. His fingers slid down bit by bit, pushing aside the hem of her dress and rubbing against her thighs. The numbness began to spread from his fingertips, and soon, she was completely limp. Her body rose into the air, and she subconsciously hooked her legs around his waist. Mo Jingshan, what are you doing? However, in the next moment, her entire body was carried onto his body. It was clear that she was on top. He chuckled softly. Because she hadn't completely sat down, and was still half in his arms, the man's breath entered her ears, knocking against her eardrums and invading her brain. It intertwined with the desire in her mind that even she couldn't suppress, flashing like sparks of fire in a haze. Don't you dislike being bullied by me? I'll give you a chance to be a queen. Jin Wan. The next morning, when Jin Wan woke up with a sore back, Mo Jingshan was already dressed neatly and reading the morning newspaper delivered by the hotel in the living room. She walked out in her slippers, yawning as she glared at the well-dressed man who acted as if nothing had happened. Beasts. Dressed like a beast. Mo Jingshan seemed to have heard her silent criticism. He lowered the morning paper and looked at her with his dark eyes. Both of them had gone to bed very late, and Jin Wan was sleepy even though she had slept for at least an hour longer than him. But the man's eyes didn't show the slightest tiredness. Breakfast is on the table. Eat quickly. We're going to the airport today. Got it. Knowing that they had to catch a flight today, he refused to let her off last night. It was not enough to end it once. He insisted on making her faint several times before he stopped. She opened the plate on the table. Inside were the crab dumplings that the hotel had specially made for them. Mo Jingshan needed to nourish his stomach for the next few days, but Jin Wan didn't need to. She thought she was already satisfied with the barbecue he made for her last night. She didn't expect that she would have such authentic crab roe soup dumplings to eat before she left today. However, the process of making this thing was so troublesome. He must have informed the hotel and asked them to deliver it early in the morning. Jin Wan had been tormented by the man for an entire night. In the second half of the night, she felt that the barbecue she had eaten had been completely digested. She had been hungry for a long time. Right now, she couldn't care less and directly sat down to eat. Didn't you say yesterday that the hotel is near the sea and the morning air is very cold? Can't you put on your clothes? Mo Jingshan looked at the nightgown hanging from her shoulders and could not help but sigh. He reached out to help her adjust her collar. It wouldn't have mattered if she hadn't pulled it, but with this gentle tug, a ray of spring light was pulled away from her collar. Between her snow-white neck and collarbone, light red spots were scattered all over the places he kissed last night. The marks that could not be hidden were written into her body, honestly recording all the joy of love last night. What are you trying to do now? It's so early in the morning, and I'm still being raped by you while eating. Mo Jingshan, you cultured scum. Jin Wan's body instinctively went on alert. She, who was still chewing on the soup bun, slapped away his hand that was protecting her collar. You definitely can't continue. We'll be late for the plane. What are you thinking about? Mo Jingshan's handsome brows moved slightly. In the end, he only smiled and picked up the coat hanging on the back of the chair to cover her shoulders. Hurry up and eat. We have to catch the plane. Oh, the alarm was lifted. She could eat in peace. Also, he thought for a moment before turning back. Recently, the weather in Los Angeles has been very cold. Don't wear too little, especially clothes that reveal your shoulders. Recently, he had watched Jinwon swim more often. Mo Jingshan increasingly felt that he wanted to hide every part of this little woman's body. Even if it was just an ordinary spaghetti strap dress, he could not let her wear it. After all, it was really too easy to attract a man's attention. Oh, Jinwon continued to eat. When he was not paying attention, she softly muttered, "Miser." The last minute of Jinwon's life on the Argentinian island was stretched by Mo Jingshan to the point that it felt like a century. They passed by the dessert shop in the departure hall. Jinwon wanted to eat sundaes and ice cream, but Mo Jingshan refused to let her eat anything cold. Instead, he bought ice cream-flavored donuts for her. They passed by the various unremarkable specialty shops in the departure hall, which also had a variety of exotic styles. In the end, when they were finally about to board the plane, they did not take the first-class entrance, but stood at the back of the crowd. Rather than saying that Mo Jingshan was completely complying with Jinwon's wishes, it was more accurate to say that Jinwon wanted Boss Missouri to interact with the common people. After all, it seemed that every time she returned to Los Angeles, something big happened. But after all, Shine Group was here, and so was the Mo family of Los Angeles. This was also the place where she studied when she was a teenager, so even though Jinwon had almost been traumatized by Los Angeles, this place was still indissoluble in her life. She still had to travel around High City and Los Angeles. She didn't know that Mo Jingshan had relinquished his power in the underground arms trade and was no longer in charge of it. She just thought that Atuda and the other troublesome people had been completely dealt with, and that was why he returned to Los Angeles so peacefully and no longer had any trouble. As soon as they returned, Mo Jingshan's mother, Ms. Wanju, got the news that Jinwon and the others had returned to Los Angeles. Although Mo Xiaoza and Ms. Wanju were old and no longer in charge of the company's affairs, they had worked hard for Shine for many years, so they must still be in close contact with the company. The person in charge of this matter must have told them that Mo Jingshan had gone to Argentina, and that Jinwon and Mo Jingshan were together. So less than 2 days after returning to Los Angeles, Ms. Wanju came to ask Jinwon to go back to live with the Mo family in Los Angeles. She still called Jinwon daughter-in-law. Even though they hadn't seen each other for 3 years, she was still familiar with them. On the contrary, Mo Jingshan had no intention of letting Jinwon go back with him, nor did he intend to let Jinwon leave his sight. When returning to Los Angeles, he had to go back to Shine's headquarters to deal with some important affairs, so Jinwon simply stayed in the break room in his office. Chapter 727. Qin Sighting happened to return to the United States these days, and was caught by Mo Jingshan to examine Jinwon. From the beginning, he knew that Jinwon's head injury wouldn't be a big problem after Dr. Wendell's operation, and the remaining blood would be completely absorbed by the brain. But Jinwon's recovery speed was indeed very fast. When he came to check on her, Qin Sighting couldn't help saying, "Sure enough, he didn't take a vacation to look after you at home for nothing." This kind of inseparable way not only greatly stimulates your dependence and familiarity with him, but also allows you to stay in a safe environment. Such a peaceful way of recovery is good for you. At least this headache will be mostly relieved. Will you still have headaches in the future? Jinwon asked. At present, after all, it hasn't been long since I recovered. In the short term, I may have headaches due to strenuous exercise, or symptoms such as car sickness and plane sickness. I may not be able to bear the pressure of high altitude and some ordinary bumps. Usually, I won't have any headaches, but after a certain period of treatment, I will slowly recover. Don't worry. Qin Sighting's words were always reliable. Jinwon didn't need to worry, and now she didn't need to. Since Ms. Wanju learned that Jinwon and Mo Jingshan had returned to Los Angeles, even if she couldn't bring her daughter-in-law home as she wished, she still came to the company to talk to Jinwon every day. Jinwon was still hiding from the people of MN Group, especially from Xia Tian. She still pretended that she had not recovered from her illness, and tried to stall for as long as she could. So when there was no company business coming to her, she was really bored. Being dragged around by Wanju to go shopping and chat with her was a good way to save her boredom. When passing by a photography studio opened by a Chinese in Los Angeles, Wanju suddenly tugged at Jinwan's cuff with bright eyes. "Daughter-in-law, when you and Jingshan got married, didn't you take wedding photos?" Jinwan also looked in the direction of the photography studio. They did take wedding photos, but they also didn't take them. At that time, she didn't know much about the man she was going to marry. It was only because of Ji Hongwen's persuasion, and for grandfather Mo's sake, that she agreed to let the photographer take a few photos of her at home, with the wedding dress he had chosen for her. Although there were wedding photos of her and Mo Jingshan, they were all single photos. The only one that was in the same frame was photoshopped. After all, she did not remember seeing Mo Jingshan before the wedding. After that, those photos were never displayed in the U Garden. After all, she was unwilling to display them in the beginning. Later, because they were all taken alone, she felt that it was meaningless, so she never took them out again. So when Wanju took her into the studio and offered to book a set of wedding photos for the two of them, Jinwan did not refuse. In fact, she was also very curious about the process of taking wedding photos. Furthermore, she had never taken this kind of photo with Mo Jingshan in her previous lives, so she more or less had a little desire. Although Mo Jingshan had been busy these days in Los Angeles, he only took a look at Jinwan when Wanju arranged for him and Jinwan to take wedding photos. Seeing that Jinwan seemed to be looking forward to it, he didn't refuse. After asking about the scheduled time, he told his secretary to clear the photo shoot time and not to arrange other work, which obviously meant that he agreed to accompany Jinwan to take the photo. In fact, the wedding photo shoot was scheduled for 2 days later. That day, Mo Jingshan drove Jinwan there in person, without needing Ms. Wanju's nagging to remind him. After all, his wife was his. As long as Jinwan cared about him, as long as she wanted, he would spend 10 times more energy and time to accompany her to make up for all the regrets he had. At least, he couldn't leave any regrets, in case this little woman always found reasons to be unreasonable with him. This studio was specially chosen by Ms. Wanju. It was said that an old friend's great-grandfather had studied abroad more than 100 years ago, and then settled in the United States, where he opened a studio here. This studio had been open for more than 100 years, and was now a very famous studio in Los Angeles. Most of the people who came here to take photos were Chinese. Of course, some foreigners who wanted to take photos in Chinese classical style would also come here. Recently, Wanju also wanted to take good care of the two of them, so when she booked the photo shoot, she took the initiative to choose 4 sets of clothes for them in advance. Jinwan trusted Ms. Wanju very much, so she naturally wore whatever she had. The first 2 sets of her white wedding dress and Mo Jingshan's suit were very normal, and the photos were also very happy. The third set was purely in Chinese classical style, the kind of bright red wedding dress, and also very beautiful. Based on Madame Wanju's age, no matter how fashionable she was, the things that caught her eye would definitely follow the rules. She would not come up with all sorts of novel ideas like young people. However, she had to admit that although these styles were conventional, each one was more festive than the last. It made Jinwan feel as though she was not married to Mo Jingshan for long. Instead, it was as though she was preparing for her wedding. There were several times when she changed her clothes and came out to take photos. Under the thin layer of foundation in her bridal dress, her face would turn red. And the fourth set. Before entering the fitting room, Jinwan's mind had been set on the clothing of women of the Republic of China in the anti-Japanese war films, or those young ladies from wealthy families, or those singing at night in Shanghai. She tried on several sets of cheongsam in a row. Although they were beautiful, Jinwan could not show much style. Especially with Ms. Wanju watching from the side with a smile, she was even more stiff. In the end, she either dressed up as a young lady in a standard photo studio style, or dressed up as a prostitute with the taste of a good woman. Facing the mirror, she twisted her body with her hands on her hips, stretched out her slender legs, and tried to throw a kiss and a wink. It was not that Jean Wan did not know how to dress seductively. It was not that she had never been sexy before, but Ms. Wanju was by the side. She wanted to act very flirtatious, but she still held back a little. Her movements were also slightly stiff, so for some reason, she looked very much like a child secretly wearing an adult's clothes. In the end, Ms. Wanju thought that she was tired from taking photos today, and did not want her to be too tired. So she simply gave up on this classic and sexy look, and decided on a scholarly student's outfit. In the end, very good. After putting it on, Jean Wan felt that she could directly participate in the Yellow River cantata. Jean Wan looked at herself in the mirror with 2 braids, and felt a little discouraged. She wondered if she had really become too thin recently. She could even wear sexy clothes to look like a good woman. In the end, she could only dress up like this. No wonder Mo Jingshan said she was thin every day, and told her to eat more every meal. Jean Wan's eyes lit up. Chapter 728. Jean Wan looked at herself in the mirror. She was dressed like a student of the Republic of China. Although she was beautiful, and Mrs. Wanju praised her by the side, Jean Wan still complained that she was too thin. She touched her waist, and made a plan in her heart. From tonight onwards, she would have at least 2 dinners, a plate of vegetables and a plate of meat. She thought as she walked out of the changing room, wanting to call the makeup artist over. Not far behind the changing room was a small balcony. Occasionally, there would be staff smoking there. Jean Wan knew that Mo Jingshan's changing room was not far from there, and subconsciously glanced in that direction. In the end, she saw that the small balcony was covered with a warm sunlight weave, and there was a tall and straight figure standing against the direction of the light, which made her feel a little strange, but also so familiar. His shoulders were draped in a thick, dark trench coat. Around his collar was a circle of fur that indicated his status. Under the sunlight, it shone with the unique luster of animal fur. Above his black hair was a wide-brimmed hat of the same color. A long, light-colored scarf hung from his neck all the way to his waist, swaying gently with his movements. She saw him turn his body slightly. The dark gray 3-piece suit accentuated his waist into a charming curve, and the elegant bronze-colored metal buckle became a low-key decoration. Under the love of the light, the retro patterns on it could be seen clearly. He tightened his black leather gloves. The lighter in his hand, which was originally meant for decoration, but could also be used, made a crisp sound. Then he lowered his head slightly, and lit a white cigarette. Jean Wan rarely saw Mo Jingshan smoke. She only remembered that when she first returned from London and saw him in High City, he seemed to smoke a lot at that time. However, it gradually decreased. She had also heard from Shenmu that Mo Jingshan did not like to smoke. Even if he did, it was only occasionally. However, in the 3 years she was not around, he was indeed a heavy smoker. That lighter was clearly just a prop for taking pictures. The cigarette must have been a staff member who saw him dressed like this, and felt that he should be handed one to Mo Jingshan. Thus, Mo Jingshan took it and, because he was waiting for her to change, lit it up. At this moment she saw Mo Jingshan, his side profile with the cigarette in his mouth. When he lowered his head, his Adam's apple moved slightly. Between the cuffs of his white shirt and his black gloves, his wrist that was not wrapped in any cloth, the collar he clasped tightly, and the finger that gently loosened his tie. It was as though they had turned into walking hormones, ruthlessly firing several shots in her heart, killing her on the spot. Jean Wan was so absorbed in watching that she accidentally bumped into the cleaning tools by the door of the changing room, and fell to the ground with a clang, shattering all the fantasies she had about pouncing on Big Boss. Mo Jingshan seemed to have heard the noise. He extinguished the remaining half of the cigarette, and narrowed his eyes to look at her. When he turned around, his trench coat and scarf formed a perfect arc, and the lines of tension were thrown into her heart. She only saw his eyes under the brim of his hat and black hair. They were very deep, and because of this rare outfit, they looked very unruly. It was as though he had turned into the Republic of Mo Jingshan, and the Mo of her. Mo Jingshan of Mo of Jingshan Mo. He had easily snatched away her 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Yet, When the man looked at her, he walked over after a while. Mo Jingshan sized her up. It was clear that he was suspicious of the style of Jin Wan's clothes. Are you going to go on a cruise? Jin Wan touched her Republic of China student attire and her 2 braids. She could not help but say with a sullen expression, recently, no matter how much I eat, I can't gain any weight. I've been too skinny for the past few months. I should be dressed like a singer. It's perfect for a business tycoon like you, but right now, I can't support that kind of clothes. Mo Jingshan held back his laughter. He looked at Jin Wan, who had turned into a literary young man, because she could not dress like a singer. He then glanced at the light blue student attire and long skirt she was wearing. This is not bad. Who told you that a business tycoon must like a singer? My stomach has just recovered. It's not good to eat too much fish and meat. Plain porridge and side dishes suit my appetite. Plain porridge and side dishes? Have you forgotten how sexy I was when I first came back from London and was pursued by all kinds of men? She was still a little thin since she was injured and in a coma. When her figure returned to its perfect state, let's see if he still dared to say she was a plain porridge and side dishes. Jin Wan was not willing to be a plain porridge and side dish. She turned back to the dressing room and planned to change into a cheongsam. Mo Jingshan waited at the door for a moment. Because Jin Wan said she wanted to choose her own clothes, he asked the staff to go out first. Wan Zhu also came out to find the water dispenser to pour a glass of water for Jin Wan. Only Jin Wan was left in the room. The man glanced at the dressing room, which was slightly closed by Ms. Wan Zhu. He frowned and reached out to help close the door, so as not to expose himself. However, the moment he approached the door, he caught a glimpse of the scene inside. He kept his hand on the door handle and did not move. His little woman. She reluctantly changed into the faraway songstress clothes. From the beginning, her body was exposed, and then she put on the clothes. Then, she stood in front of the mirror and kept posing. She threw coquettish glances and pouted to show all kinds of sexy and charming expressions. Perhaps she felt that it was not enough, so she pulled down the clothes on her shoulders and continued to pose with her thighs exposed in front of the mirror. Perhaps the 2 braids on her head were too strange, so she untied her hair and stood in front of the mirror with her long hair hanging loose. So how satisfied was she with the clothes he was wearing that she was so dissatisfied with herself because of the contrast? The little woman pinched the cloth on her waist from time to time, wondering if she should use a clip to clamp a piece of cloth behind her, so that she would not look too thin. After posing like this for a long time, Jin Wan was tired of blinking and finally glanced at the door out of the corner of her eye. However, she suddenly saw the man outside the door who had been watching her for a long time. She screamed and turned to rush over to close the door, but she ran too fast. She was wearing indoor slippers for changing clothes, so she staggered and fell forward. The man outside the door opened the door unsurprisingly and caught the little woman, who threw herself into his arms. When Jin Wan stumbled out of his arms, looking at her disheveled hair, Mo Jingshan smiled slightly. The way you threw yourself into my arms is more seductive than any other style. Chapter 729. When it was finally time to take a photo, Jin Wan still wore her outfits and stood together with Mo Jingshan. In the end, the experienced photography teacher smacked his lips and was especially satisfied. His mouth was full of praises of a perfect match. His steady tone added the color of age to this studio that had been open for more than 100 years in Los Angeles. Mrs. Wan Zhu was all smiles by the side. When the photo shoot was over, she rushed over to hold Jin Wan's hand and asked her if she was tired, as though she was afraid of exhausting her daughter-in-law. Perhaps it was because Mrs. Wan Zhu had been too excited for the past 2 days that she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Or perhaps it was because she had received Mo Jingshan's tacit approval that she told Elder Mo about their wedding photo shoot. Thus, Elder Mo took advantage of this excitement and actually flew from High City to Los Angeles the next day. According to Elder Mo, it had been at least 10 years since he had taken a plane, and it had been 17 or 18 years since he had been to America. This time, in order to find his granddaughter-in-law, He was willing to risk his life to come to Los Angeles to reunite with them. He would stay in Los Angeles for a month before returning to High City. The television in the living room of Shine Group's CEO's office was broadcasting the news. Behind the host, there were people walking to and fro. Thanksgiving was very lively in the West. The small smiles on the passers-by's faces represented a certain festive atmosphere that slowly seeped into the night air. The familiar sound of pots and pans colliding gently came from the spare kitchen of the break room, and a pleasant aroma of food wafted out. Jinwan sniffed. And today it was sweet and sour spare ribs. She raised her head and secretly glanced at the door. Warm light shone through the crack of the door, gently passing through the dry air and shining into her eyes. The tall and straight figure, who had just left a certain high-level meeting in this building 2 hours ago, was holding a spatula and carefully placing the dishes on a plate. The overhead light of the kitchen and the aroma of the food slowly intertwined in her consciousness, wrapping him up and gently sending him to the bottom of her heart. The faint scent of grass on his body was mixed with the smoke of the world. She saw the nape of his neck under his black hair, which curved beautifully under the light. This great boss Missouri-come-chef Mo, who usually cooked whatever she liked to eat, had started to patiently cook for her, because she had recently started to crave the taste of Chinese food again. Even though he would always complain that the smoke from Chinese food would make the house filled with smoke, her dinner would always include a few of her favorite dishes. As for the sweet and sour pork this time, she guessed that when she returned to the Mo family in Los Angeles 2 days ago, Mrs. Wanzhou had made a plate of pork ribs, but she was too embarrassed to eat too much in front of Mo Xiaozi. She only picked up 2 pieces and ate the food in front of her. It was precisely because she clearly wanted to eat, but was too embarrassed to do so. She clearly did not mention this matter, but Mo Jingshan clearly saw it. While her thoughts were still wandering, he had already walked out of the kitchen. In her eyes, the sight of him holding a plate was more tempting than the steaming hot sweet and sour pork ribs. "What are you looking at?" He freed a hand to pat her head as she approached. "Go wash your hands." There was a faint fragrance on his hand, carrying the warmth she was familiar with. It was as though this extremely ordinary office break room was able to block out all the disturbances of the world. The festive atmosphere of the Westerners outside had also transformed into a warm and ordinary day by his side, peaceful and lasting. After the meal, "Come with me to the Mo family tonight. Someone has come," Mo Jingshan suddenly said as Jinwan placed the last piece of pork ribs into her mouth. Jinwan abruptly coughed. She almost spat out the pork ribs she had just finished eating. She glanced at him in surprise. "Isn't Grandfather Mo here? Who else is there?" "Grandfather hasn't been to America for almost 20 years. It's rare for him to come." His old friends from back then heard the news and naturally came to visit. He placed a glass of warm milk in front of her, scolding her for being useless with his gaze. "But they're having a reunion with their old friends. Do they need us to go over?" As Jinwan spoke, she carefully pushed the glass of warm milk to the side. She wanted to push it further away when he was not paying attention. She had eaten a lot earlier. Right now, there was no space left in her stomach to hold the milk. Who was the one who said that in the future, you have to eat 2 bowls of rice, 2 bowls of vegetables, and 2 glasses of milk for every meal? You've only reached half of your goal, and you can't eat any more? He noticed her small movements. "Are you still complaining that you're too thin?" Jinwan glanced at the milk that she had pushed further away. Tonight, she had eaten a bowl and a half of rice and an entire plate of sweet and sour pork ribs. Mo Jingshan had barely eaten, allowing her to eat them all. How could she have such a big stomach? However, this milk had been warmed by Boss Missouri with good intentions. Jinwan could only bring it back. She pretended not to notice the satisfied smile on his lips and drank more than half of the milk. The so-called reunion of Elder Mo's old friends was indeed different from what Jinwan had imagined. She had thought that it would be like what she had seen on television, where a group of old people in their 70s and 80s would stand together and sigh over the haste of life. Or perhaps, they would cry because they did not know if they would ever meet again. But it was a group of old men sat together drinking tea and chatting. Each of them wore a smile on their faces. Even Jinwan felt as though she was bathed in a spring breeze. However, she had no interest in this group of old men's mahjong table. It could even be said that she could not understand the way these old men thought. They had only met once in almost 20 years. Their after-dinner entertainment was not to sit together and cry about the past, but to play mahjong. Furthermore, there were 2 mahjong tables. Just like right now, at the other table, Elder Mo and his daughter-in-law, Madame Wanzhu, were playing mahjong with 2 other old men. At this table, it was Mo Xiaoza and Mo Jingshan. Jinwan watched as Mo Jingshan took off his coat. He was wearing a fitted fine wool white sweater. The V-shaped collar revealed a gray shirt. He loosened his collar and shifted his gaze from the mahjong tiles to Jinwan, who could not wait to find something to do. He used his eyes to indicate for her to sit by his side. With so many people around, how could she have the nerve to sit so close to him? Earlier, this group of old men had not stopped mocking the 2 of them. Chapter 730. In addition, she had never seen Mo Jingshan so patiently accompanying his family and relatives. Back when they were in the Mo family in High City, Mo Jingshan had always been gentle and distant toward the group of relatives who came to suck up to the Mo family's thigh. Those people all thought that he disdained interacting with family and friends. But now, it seemed that it was only because those relatives who tried to cling on to grandfather Mo had their own motives, and Mo Jingshan really did not want to spoil them. But now he was simply helping Elder Mo maintain his image. Mo Jingshan had given him enough face. It was rare for him to patiently participate in this kind of after-dinner entertainment to accompany the elderly while playing mahjong. Or perhaps, Mo Jingshan was usually too busy. Recently, because he was accompanying her to recuperate, even if he occasionally returned to Shine Group, he would only attend some important meetings. Usually, he would spend more time with her. It was rare for Boss Missouri to have such free time. Seeing that Jinwan was bored to death watching by the side, Mo Jingshan touched a tile and continued to lock his gaze on her. Jinwan continued to shake her head. Although she really had nothing to do watching everyone play mahjong, she was considering if she should help the helpers pour tea. But previously, when she wanted to help, Mrs. Wanzhu had glared at her, indicating that there was no need for her to help and that she should rest well. Seeing that Jinwan was still standing there, Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and played the tile in his hand. Seeing that Mo Jingshan planned to give up after this round to accompany her, Jinwan chose to sit by his side to prevent the others from being disappointed. The man then calmly leaned against the back of the chair, indicating for Jinwan to help him touch the tile. After all, Jinwan was Mo Jingshan's wife. Everyone present was an elder. Seeing this young couple's behavior, they only smiled and did not have any objections or dissatisfaction. They only nagged. Tsk tisk, it's really good to be young. Under everyone's gaze, Jinwan reached out her hand. In fact, her mahjong skills were very ordinary. The last time she played mahjong was in Jing City, and it was only with Xiao Li's help that she managed to win a few rounds. How much did Mo Jingshan trust her to actually let someone like her, who was not very good at mahjong, touch the tile for him? She picked up a card and touched it in her hand for a long time, but she couldn't figure out what card it was. She had no choice but to obediently hand the card to him. He's already allowing his wife to draw the cards so calmly. It seems like Jing Shun is going to win this round. Anything she draws will win. The one speaking was an old man. Jinwan felt her cheeks heat up. She could let Mo Jingshan do whatever he wanted at home, but in front of a group of old people and relatives, even if she accidentally showed a little affection, she couldn't help blushing, and even the mahjong tiles in her hand became warm. She hurriedly stuffed the mahjong tiles into Mo Jingshan's hands, turning her head away in embarrassment. Mo Jingshan flipped his long fingers over the tiles. His face was expressionless as he casually pushed them down. Flowers blossomed on the bar. Everyone was shocked. This daughter-in-law seems to be very popular with you. Everyone started to talk at once. Jinwan's face was so red that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. Thus, when everyone left in the middle of the night and returned to their rooms to rest, Jinwan's face was still red from being teased by the old men. The main reason was that these old people were used to seeing the world. After playing mahjong and drinking tea at night, when they couldn't fall asleep, they liked to talk about young people. They even discussed who would be the god-grandfather of Jinwan's child in the future, and the ranking of the god-grandfathers. Jinwan felt that there might be something wrong with her brain a while ago, which led to some unresolved problems in her brain. Otherwise, how could she, who was usually very strict, become so careless after this illness? For example, 2 nights before returning to High City from Los Angeles, there was a company reception arranged by Shine Group. Not to mention her identity as the head of MN Group, she had to attend as Mrs. Mo, who had been publicly acknowledged time and time again. However, whether in the Mo family's bedroom in Los Angeles, or in the 300-square-meter lounge next to Shine Group's CEO's office, these spacious spaces resulted in her often rummaging through cabinets and cabinets to look for things that she didn't know where she had left them last time. It was almost December. Although it was not Shine Group's year-end reception, it was rare for Mo Jingshan to attend it in person, so it was naturally more grand than usual. Mo Jingshan, have you seen the white shawl I bought a few days ago? Jinwan rummaged through the closet in the bedroom and shouted angrily at Mo Jingshan, who was outside. I put it in the lounge after I bought it. Where did it go? How would I know? CEO Mo, who was neatly dressed, looked at his watch. There was still half an hour before the reception began. Don't rush. Take your time. We're running out of time. There was a clattering sound in the room. Mo Jingshan thought that Jinwan was going to tear down the closet door. It was not too late. It was only a 5-minute drive from here to the reception, which was enough for Jinwan to continue looking for things. Now the only reason why she was impatient was that she had been looking for this shawl for more than an hour and still hadn't found it. Can't you change to another one? He watched as she ran from the master bedroom to the secondary bedroom. He suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He paused for a moment before walking over. When Jinwan opened the secondary bedroom's closet door, it was empty, yet it seemed to be filled to the brim. A man's suit was neatly hung on the left, along with several neat shirts. By the side, there was a leather coat with an intricately patterned bronze-colored buttons. It was paired with a cane and a wide-brimmed hat. It looked slightly familiar. Wasn't this the business tycoon's outfit that Mo Jingshan wore that day in the Chinese photo studio? She heard the man's footsteps and the door closing behind her. When she turned back, she met his deep black eyes. Mr. Mo, do you want to explain? She thought that he had an indescribable fondness for this kind of thing, and couldn't help but deliberately glance at the closet. The man was unperturbed. I asked someone to custom make a new set based on that one. The quality of the clothes there is too poor. Not only was he unperturbed, he even leisurely added, Don't you like it a lot? This time, it was Jinwan who was speechless. She stared at the man's expression, which could not be any calmer. She recalled her infatuated expression when she faced the business tycoon of the Republic of China, Mo Jingshan, and her lips couldn't help but twitch. Chapter 731. Aren't you going to the cocktail party? What are you doing? Jinwan's body instinctively sounded the alarm again. When she turned around, she saw that he had locked the door to the break room. She couldn't help but ask, You're not going to the cocktail party? I'll change my clothes for you to see. The expensive necktie was casually thrown to the ground, and then he began to unbutton his shirt unhurriedly. So that you don't have to think about it every day. Jinwan. She did remember it. After all, Mo Jingshan usually wore normal clothes. He was either a strict CEO style, or a clean and refreshing home style. It was rare for him to dress up deliberately, and it was only for the photo shoot. However, the style that time was really shocking. At that time, she even regretted that he would only wear that kind of clothes once in his life. She didn't expect that he actually noticed her regret at that time. She watched as the man's fingers moved down bit by bit, from his collarbone to his chest, and then to his slim waist. His undulating lines and perfect figure were faintly discernible under the white shirt. When the man changed into that set of clothes in front of her, Jinwan was stunned. If one were to say that his appearance at the photo studio was enough to shock them, then right now, when Emo Jingshin wore this set of clothes made of perfect material, it completely brought out the incomparable aura that a man was born with. Seeing that the little woman's gaze was fixed on him, Emo Jingshin's lips curved slightly. "Do you like it very much?" Jinwon nodded blankly. Perhaps because she was becoming more and more honest recently, she no longer held back her temper and said things that went against her heart. Her obedient appearance was especially moving. Before she could speak, the man had already carried her up. She was still wearing the gown that she had just changed into. In order to find a matching shawl, she had walked around the room for a long time. She had been wearing it the entire time, but when she was carried up and then placed on the soft white bed, the gown's trailing covered her body. This was a white gown, and the trailing was covered with layers of beautiful white chiffon. The white chiffon fluttered in the air with her movements and then scattered, dyeing a pure white. It was like a flawless brocade. His lips and hands were familiar with every part of her body. He explored her body with ease, and soon, she was completely defeated. Before the last line of reason collapsed, she heard him whisper in her ear. His voice was dark and hoarse, and there was a hint of sluggish panting at the end. "There's no need to look for the shawl. Just change into a new one later." Jinwon. Now, even if he didn't want to, he had no choice but to change. Wait a minute. She suddenly realized that it was almost time for the banquet, and wanted to remind him. "What are you waiting for?" He put his hands around her disobedient waist. Jinwon couldn't help but cry out, almost covering his soft sigh of satisfaction. Just as Jinwon was about to lose her mind and forget the passage of time, her cell phone suddenly rang. Jinwon originally wanted to ask him to stop, but when she saw the man reach out to pick up the phone, her remaining rationality rang in her ears, and she instinctively felt that something was wrong. "Yes, it's me. Speak." He put his index finger to his lips and gestured for her to keep quiet. Jinwon did not expect his actions and covered her mouth to prevent herself from making a loud sound. "Emo Jingshin, are you 3 this year? I have time now. Take your time." Although he was still speaking into the phone, his gaze kept moving around her body. His naked desire was about to tear her apart and eat her up. His palm held her cheek, and his slender knuckles probed along her lips into her mouth. She couldn't help but let out the sound that had been suppressed in her throat. The voice on the other end of the phone was slightly muffled, and a sense of tension that she had never felt before stimulated her brain. Furthermore, this man's playful and lustful gaze moved back and forth on her body, moving such a familiar scene between the sheets into broad daylight. It actually caused her 3 souls and 7 spirits to tremble. Jinwon even felt like she was a young girl who had just experienced the ways of the world. She was completely at a loss. However, in her heart, she hoped that the highest pleasure from her soul would engulf her. On the other end of the phone, the man continued to report with a serious expression. She fell onto the bed and was almost forced to cry. She turned her head and bit down on the corner of the blanket. Her suppressed voice had long been broken by the man's teasing. "Emo Jingshin." She heard her own voice was hoarse and choked as she called out his name. She could not take it anymore. By the time he finally hung up the phone in satisfaction, Jinwon had already suffered a crushing defeat. Her tears mixed with her messy hair covered her face. Because she had been biting down on the corner of the blanket for a long time, her lipstick had rubbed against the edge. She appeared somewhat messy and disheveled, but it also added to her seductiveness. Jinwon had always known that the pleading and weakness that she unintentionally revealed was the most effective aphrodisiac in the eyes of men. In just a moment, her entire body seemed to be brought together by his scent. Every cell in her body was engraved with his name. Those 3 words seemed to have seeped into her flesh and bones, sinking into the deepest part of her body. It was as though it could not be erased. As a result, they arrived at the hotel 2 hours late, although they were originally supposed to arrive in half an hour. Most importantly, Jinwon was picked up from the bed in an exhausted state by the man. He gave her a bath and helped her pick out a suitable set of clothes. Since they were in a rush, Jinwon did a simple hairstyle that looked very good. Just like that, Mo Jingshan directly brought her to the venue of the reception. When they arrived, a group of people from Shine Group and their business partners swarmed over. Jean Wan had been tormented by this beast in human clothing until she was dispirited. When she arrived, she maintained a suitable smile. When the crowd gradually dispersed, she found a seat with fewer people and sat down. She was so tired that she did not want to speak. If it weren't for the fact that she was attending as the representative of MN Group today, she most likely would have directly fallen asleep on the bed. She definitely would not have come. However, after all, MN Group's face was here. She had worked so hard to support the company, and it was rare for it to have such an occasion in Los Angeles. It would not be appropriate for her to not come. But it was true. Good. Tired. Most importantly, not only did she not find her shawl, but he had also forcefully destroyed the gown she liked. Mo Jingshan, this beast. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.